On December 24, 1988, an Arizona police station received a call from the area in Pinal County, not far from the so-called Superstition Mountains. Witnesses had found the body of a young woman with signs of violence. She was in casual clothes and without a purse or any identifying documents, therefore, the victim could not be immediately identified. There was a deep wound on her leg, and blood was on her body. Her neck had been cut and was completely covered with stab wounds. All of her clothes were soaked in blood. An autopsy of the woman's body revealed that the injuries sustained were much more serious than they initially appeared to the witness. The victim had several deep, penetrating wounds in her neck that pierced the spine and practically separated her head from her body. 4 additional stab wounds had broken 2 ribs and pierced her heart. The most terrible marks were barely noticeable bruises on her left temple and eyebrow. The forensic expert was not certain, but suspected that these were marks from the sole of a shoe. On the ground where the body was found, forensic experts discovered similar marks, suggesting that she had been deliberately pressed to the ground with a foot to limit her mobility and inflict these fatal wounds. In addition to these obvious injuries, the unidentified victim had traces of prolonged beating on her face and body, scratches on her knees, and a defensive wound on one of her hands. It was clear that the crime had been committed with intent. Detectives believed that the killer should be sought among her acquaintances, but she had not yet been identified. However, that same day, the situation changed when the county police department received a call from Kathy Monkman, who reported that her older sister had gone missing the day before. The missing woman's name was Cynthia Monkman. Kathy explained that her sister had not shown up for a Christmas party, which was planned for the night before Christmas Eve. This was strange because Cynthia had been actively involved in organizing the event. She hadn't even warned anyone that she would not be able to come. After that, she stopped answering calls. Kathy did not immediately report Cynthia's disappearance to the police. She thought it was possible that Cynthia might have changed her plans. However, the next day, they were supposed to fly home together to Illinois. Kathy left a note with the flight information and a ticket for the 7:30 a.m. departure. She still hoped that Cynthia would show up, but when Kathy got on the plane and did not see her sister in the seat next to her, she realized that something terrible had happened. Kathy provided a description of the missing person that matched the found unidentified body, including the timeline of Cynthia's disappearance, which was just a day before her body was discovered in the desert. Detectives learned that shortly before her death, Cynthia had spontaneously married a man she had met a couple of months earlier. After comparing all the known facts, law enforcement officers came to the conclusion that they had found 30-year-old Cynthia Monkman, who was later identified by her sister and confirmed by dental records. Cynthia was born on September 16, 1958, in Pensacola, Florida. Her younger sister was born a year later, and from the very beginning, they were inseparable. Their father, Jack, was a psychologist, while their mother, Dorothy, became a housewife when the girls were born. Another child, a boy, was born 2 years later. The family moved to Champaign, Illinois, where their father was invited to work. The life of this close-knit family turned tragic when Dorothy discovered she had breast cancer. 2 years later, despite all efforts, Dorothy died, leaving Jack as a single father with 3 children aged 6, 4, and 2. It was not easy, but with the help of relatives, Jack managed to raise the younger generation successfully. After finishing school, the sisters remained inseparable. They attended college together, had a lot of fun and attended parties like other young people. They often made impromptu trips to meet old friends across the states. In 1980, Kathy decided to move to Arizona to study in nursing school, and Cynthia decided to follow her 2 years later. Cynthia eventually received a master's degree in public health and began a career as a nutritionist. In 1983, at the age of 25, she was offered a breakthrough opportunity to head a health center in a large Minnesota corporation and decided to take advantage of it. Having to move thousands of kilometers away from her sister to gain experience in her career, she soon grew tired of loneliness. In 1986, Cynthia decided to move back and settled in an apartment near her sister. Cynthia was a vibrant and attractive woman, always the center of attention. She had many suitors. In the first month after moving back, she met Mark, a DJ at a radio station and a local celebrity. They started dating. They led an active lifestyle and had a lot of fun, but their relationship was full of ups and downs. Mark wanted to maintain his party lifestyle, while Cynthia was looking for something more stable and was ready to think about starting a family. In July, 29-year-old Cynthia suggested to her boyfriend that they break up. After the breakup, she grieved for some time and found it hard to cope with this difficult moment in her life. To unwind, she and her sister went on a short trip to the beach in California. Despite the separation, the two young people still had mutual feelings for each other. On October 8th, at a party in a popular local club, Cynthia met two brothers, Michael Apelt and Rudy Alfred Apelt, who were both tall, attractive guys from Germany. Cynthia immediately felt a mutual attraction. Kathy realizing that her sister was head over heels in love. Michael was the youngest of 7 siblings, 5 years younger than Cynthia. The young people spoke English poorly, making communication quite difficult. However, as Cynthia put it, they were on the same wavelength, so they understood each other perfectly without words. The next day, Cynthia could not talk about anyone else. When she went to have breakfast with her sister, she even mentioned that Michael had said several times he was ready to marry her. Kathy was very skeptical about such a bold statement right after their first meeting, but Cynthia calmed her down, saying it was just the best way to forget about the failed relationship with Mark. Her friend Annette, who had gone to the club with them, met Rudy, and the whole group started going on double dates. Gradually, the couples began more serious relationships. Only a week passed before Rudy moved in alongside Michael, who also moved in with Cynthia. Everything happened so quickly that Kathy was amazed at the changes in her sister's life. She considered these hasty decisions would not lead to anything good. The relationship continued until December 17th when Cynthia and her boyfriend attended a friend's wedding. There, Kathy noticed a wedding ring on Cynthia's finger. It turned out she had already married Michael. Later, Cynthia confessed to her sister that it happened on October 28th, just 3 weeks after they met. Kathy was shocked by such a rapid change in Cynthia's behavior. For the first time, she was keeping a secret from her sister. Now, they found Cynthia's lifeless body. Detectives analyzed the scant evidence collected after her body was discovered, including tire tracks left in the desert sand. It was clear she had been taken there intentionally to be dealt with and abandoned in a deserted place. The criminal likely expected they would never find her. However, he made a mistake, and some people accidentally discovered Cynthia. Having learned the story of the last months of the victim's life, detectives suspected that either a stormy affair with the new guy or the abandoned boyfriend could be responsible for this brutality. The degree of cruelty indicated that it was something very personal. In addition to the tire tread prints, they found several traces, including a piece of nylon cord and a blood-soaked beach towel. Detectives continued to communicate with the close circle of Cynthia and analyzed her acquaintances. A few weeks before the breakup, Cynthia learned that one of Mark's ex-girlfriends had been found dead. The investigation into this crime by the Supreme Court was still ongoing by that time. Cynthia knew that Mark was trying to get back together with her. They had only spoken 3 days before the tragedy. There had been a verbal altercation when Cynthia admitted she had married someone else. She managed to resolve the conflict, but Mark said he was going to come to town for Christmas and suggested that Cynthia meet him. Cynthia did not come to the party organized before leaving, and no one answered the calls. When morning came, Michael called Kathy, shouting into the phone, trying to understand where his wife was. It was obvious that he was drunk. Kathy tried to extract some information from him about when he last saw her sister. When know that Cynthia was supposed to meet with Mark. At this time, Kathy assumed her sister might have run away with her ex. Kathy arrived at Cynthia's apartment, hoping to find some information about her, but found nothing. The only people against whom suspicions remained were Mark and current husband, Michael. Cynthia's photo was all over the news, and her relatives received a letter sent by her on the eve of the planned trip. It looked creepy because they already knew about her death. In this letter, she discussed her relationship with her husband. She expressed a desire for them to all meet and get to know each other properly. they couldn't communicate immediately with Michael due to the language barrier. However, on the day Cynthia's relatives learned about her death, one of the detectives from the police department was sent to talk to Michael. He was inexperienced in dealing with murders and brutal crimes, but he was chosen because he spoke German fluently. Michael opened up extensively and was amazed to find someone in the police department who spoke German. The detective was most interested in the chronology of events, particularly Cynthia's and Michael's movements on that fateful day, December 23rd. As it turned out, Michael became tense from the very beginning but managed to recount the events. According to him, Cynthia's car needed maintenance, so they took her car to the dealer for repairs. After that, they rented a car to return to the apartment. On the day of the incident, Cynthia was busy preparing for the trip and mentioned planning to meet friends around 10 p.m. Michael claimed that around 7 p.m., while he was taking a shower, he heard his wife talking on the phone. He noted it was a very aggressive emotional discussion, but he had no idea who was on the other end of the line since he couldn't make out most of the words, or even the names. After Cynthia hung up, she yelled that something needed to be taken care of and left without providing any explanation. While her husband was still in the shower, Cynthia took her luggage, purse, and went to meet her friends. Michael willingly cooperated with the authorities, allowing detectives to search his apartment and car. In addition, he provided a receipt from a restaurant dated the same day, on December 23, 1988. When the police listened to the answering machine recordings, one in particular attracted their attention. At 10 a.m., Mark called, said he had seen a girl resembling Cynthia in the news reports and had heard that she was missing. Worried about her, he asked to call back to confirm if everything was okay. Considering that he was in another state, it seemed strange that Mark had managed to see the news reports so quickly. According to the detective's calculations, during this period, they barely appeared on screens, making it doubtful as if Mark was trying to clear himself out of spite. Ironically, due to his limited knowledge of English, Michael did not yet realize that his wife had died. When Michael, Rudy, and Annette were taken to the police station, they reported what had happened. Michael was very emotional, crying and even screaming as he tried to understand why this had happened. However, after that, all three were taken to different rooms for independent interrogations. Shoe prints were checked, hair and blood samples were collected from all three. At the same time, their alibis were confirmed. After that, all three were released, as they seemed unlikely suspects. Questions remained only regarding Mark, who was behaving suspiciously. The investigator leading this case flew to California to talk to the radio DJ. During this time, Cynthia's phone in Illinois received multiple calls, and the caller left numerous messages on the answering machine, supposedly trying to figure out what was going on. The detective found that Mark had been working on the day of the murder. After his shift, he rented a car, went to Los Angeles to spend Christmas with his mother and sister. Much to the surprise of the law enforcement officer, his alibi was confirmed. He could not have been Cynthia's killer. Cynthia's burial was scheduled for December 31, 1988. During the funeral, when the floor was given to Michael, he could not even utter a word. He had an emotional breakdown. He just stood there crying until his brother, Rudy, pulled him off the podium. However, when everyone was driving around after the funeral ceremony, Kathy drove past the car in which the brothers were sitting and saw them laughing with Annette. This seemed strange. Now it looked as if Michael had been pretending to grieve the whole time. Kathy informed the detectives about her doubts regarding Michael, after which the law enforcement officers decided to interview all the suspects in the case again, as something didn't add up. The first one at the police station was Kathy, who provided more details about the love story that preceded the crime. Now, it seemed to the investigators that the brothers from Germany were suspiciously secretive about everything. They avoided sharing details about their work, tried not to specify unnecessary information about themselves and their past. Kathy recalled that a few days after meeting them, she saw them going to the cheapest motel in town, despite their previous claims of staying at the most expensive motel and being involved in banking activities. She could even swear that after their first visit to her apartment, she lost $100 in cash. Initially, she convinced herself that it couldn't have happened because of them, but now she had significant doubts. The brothers had too flashy an appearance, creating the illusion of wealthy young people. After a couple of weeks of dating, they concocted a ridiculous story about being fired from the bank. Practically forced the girls to let them live with them, claiming they were waiting for something and would return to luxury later. Another oddity was the need to keep information about Cynthia's marriage a secret. Just a week after moving in with her, Michael stated he would have to return to Germany if they did not marry soon, as he would be deported. This provided the reason for such a hasty and secret wedding ceremony in Las Vegas, painting a more sinister and plausible picture. It seemed that, taking advantage of Cynthia's feelings, Michael forced his new girlfriend into marriage. Detectives tried to track down the brothers' history and were able to find several women they had met after arriving from Germany. It turned out that Cynthia was not the only one they had proposed marriage to. While it seemed that everything was going well for Cynthia and Michael compared to previous attempts, their very existence appeared suspicious. When Cynthia's diary was found, the last entry was dated November 11th. It sounded like Cynthia trying to convince herself of her husband's sincerity. No evidence was found that could connect the brothers or other acquaintances in the victim's close circle. Detectives even discovered a car rented on the day of Cynthia's death, but the tire prints did not match the tread pattern found at the crime scene. The interior of the brothers' car was also checked with analysis, but this yielded nothing. Unexpectedly, on January 3rd, Michael contacted the only German-speaking detective and reported that, after returning to the apartment following his wife's funeral, he had heard a suspicious message on the answering machine. Michael believed it contained some kind of threat but could not fully translate it, so he asked the officer for help. On January 4th, he came to the police station with the recording. It turned out that someone had indeed threatened to kill all his loved ones and himself if certain items were not received. The caller confessed to cutting Cynthia's throat with a knife, but it was unclear what items were being discussed. Detectives immediately noticed that the words were pronounced with errors and seemed feigned, as if the person was reading from a script. The text contained distortions that were uncharacteristic of English, and when it was literally translated into German, the text sounded much more coherent. The detectives feigned concern, but suspicions against Michael, Rudy, Annette began to emerge and strengthen. Where this group lived, 24-hour surveillance was in place. On January 5th, police officers monitoring the apartment complex observed them at 5:30 p.m. At 8:30 p.m., a secret agent knocked on the door. The law enforcement officer was in civilian clothes and pretended to have the wrong door. In fact, he wanted to confirm who was in the apartment and ensured that they were suspects. Interestingly, immediately after this visit, Michael reported that two black individuals had threatened him on his doorstep. He was not caught in a lie. Instead, they were invited to the station the next day to create a composite sketch of these fictitious dark-skinned men. Michael was interrogated for several hours while the rest of his group waited. The detectives deliberately prolonged the process and closely observed them to see the first signs that the criminals' will was beginning to break. Annette was the first to give in. Although she did not confess for quite some time, one of the detectives began showing her photos of the mutilated victims. Michael and Rudy were seeking citizenship, so Annette was involved to maintain communication since the brothers practically did not speak English, only Michael could communicate somewhat. They tried several schemes to introduce themselves, either as manufacturers of surfboards or as importers of German cars. According to the same story, they met Cynthia. For several months, they lived in a cheap motel, deceiving many women who succumbed to their looks and charm as man escort. This allowed them to receive money from these women for a living, but they were waiting for something more. Annette did not admit to the murder or even that it was planned. However, it was clear that her relationship with Cynthia had been based solely on a desire for profit. After they began living together and got married, Cynthia worked 2 jobs while Michael spent money recklessly, claiming he was waiting for the unblocking of accounts in Germany. From October to December, he managed to spend more than $4,000 from his girlfriend's wallet. After obtaining this confession, the detectives pressured Annette, threatening that she would be charged with murder if she did not tell the truth. She confessed that Michael had developed a taste for the good life and wanted more money, after which he devised a larger plan. On November 7th, he convinced his wife Cynthia to contact an insurance agent and take out life insurance policies for $1 million on each other. The beneficiary of her policy was, of course, Michael. He continued to feed her false statements, saying that their accounts in Germany were frozen, but that he would soon have access to them, making life insurance essential for them. Cynthia blindly trusted her husband due to her feelings. The insurance agent approved the policy, but it was not for $1 million, it was for $400,000. Without hesitation, Cynthia wrote out a check. After that, the brothers began to plan their expenses in anticipation of receiving the money. They even drew up a purchase and sale agreement for 2 Jaguar cars worth $144,000 each and 2 Toyota cars, each worth $66,000. They were also looking for expensive items, fully aware that in order to obtain all this luxury, they would have to kill. Cynthia's life insurance policy went into effect just a day before her death, and the insurance amount was even increased to $800,000. By this time, the brothers had already rented a car in which they planned to take Cynthia to the desert and kill her. On the day of the crime, Michael and Rudy took Cynthia to the desert, then lured her out of the car and brutally handled her. Annette was even in the car. According to her, it took the brothers about 5 minutes to stab the innocent victim. When they returned, both were covered in blood from head to toe. They changed their clothes and washed the blood off their skin to avoid staining the car. After getting rid of all the evidence, they returned the rented car and went to a luxury restaurant to celebrate their victory. Everything seemed to go according to plan, and it was supposed to be the perfect murder that promised great riches, except that Cynthia's body was quickly found. The plan began to crumble before their eyes. Was Cynthia their first murder victim? To answer these questions, detectives contacted colleagues in Germany to uncover the truth about the brothers' dark past. They found that Michael did not have any blocked accounts containing large sums of money, nor did he own any estate in Germany. In reality, he was a laborer with a criminal past that included convictions for burglary and assault. His brother Rudy had served time in a German prison for abuse. Due to their criminal history, connections to other possible crimes in the USA could not be found, indicating that perhaps Cynthia was their first and only victim. There was only one perplexing question left. Why did the tire tracks of the car used to transport the victim not match the tracks that were found? It turned out that Michael had anticipated this. On the day of the tragedy, he drove in such a way that it damaged the tread on the tires. When he returned the rented car, the tires had to be replaced. The person who provided the car for rent helped the police realize that it was true. In order to leave sinister messages with threats, they used a random homeless man on the streets of Los Angeles. After Cynthia's funeral, he was paid to call the specified phone number and read a text from a sheet. Annette was offered immunity from prosecution in exchange for testifying against Michael and Rudy. She agreed. A thorough search was conducted of the apartment where Cynthia and Michael lived, leading to the discovery of a pair of shoes whose soles matched the footprints found at the crime scene, which confirmed Michael and Rudy's guilt. During the imprisonment of the individual involved, notes containing incriminating information were found and used against them. At the trial, the most reckless act was Michael's decision to speak in his own defense. Even his lawyers tried to dissuade him, but to no avail. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. His confidence worked against him, as he made several contradictory confessions that only convinced the jury of his guilt. Michael and Rudy made a desperate attempt to shift the blame onto Annette, but this also failed. August 10, 1990, the jury found Michael Apelt and Rudy Alfred Apelt guilty of first-degree murder. Both brothers were sentenced to death. However, in 2009, Rudy's sentence was overturned because an IQ test showed that he was mentally disabled. His sentence was commuted to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. After 25 years, Rudy applied for parole in 2017. At the commission meeting, a letter was read from Kathy, who recalled that it was Rudy who inflicted most of the knife wounds on Cynthia and slit her throat. Kathy was convinced that such a man was dangerous and should not be released. As a result, his petition was denied. On April 26, 2022, 52-year-old Rudy died behind bars. Michael's sentence has not changed. He remains on death row awaiting execution. His defense is deliberately delaying the execution appeal, prolonging his life. Cynthia's death was so devastating that it prevented Kathy from trusting men and people in general. She did not marry until she was 50 years old. The murder of Cynthia Monkman cannot be called a crime of passion. It was a cold calculation by sociopaths for whom human life became merely a tool for achieving material goals. Insurance companies, in their attempt to increase profits by selling high-value policies, unwittingly created the conditions for murder by providing the criminals with a financial motive. Evidence indicates that the Apelt brothers would not have killed Cynthia if her life had not been insured. They probably would have turned their attention to another victim.
On the morning of November 13, 2024, in Lima, everything went on as usual. In the Santa Anita neighborhood, Shayla Condor slung a pink bag over her shoulder, telling her aunt that she would be back soon. However, by evening, she still did not come to work. Her phone was off. No messages. Shayla had disappeared. A few days later, a foul stench emanated from the apartment of a police sergeant named Darwin. When the door was opened, the horrifying truth emerged. A suitcase under the bed and a plastic bag in the bathroom. Inside was Shayla's dismembered body, but the tragedy was not over. Just a few days later, Darwin was found dead in his hotel room. The body was stiff. The time of death did not match. The records were missing. No weapon, no explanation, only silence. Did Darwin harm himself, or did someone want to silence him? A simple disappearance becomes a national shock. A woman murdered, Dawn Cam, a police officer mysteriously dead, and a cover-up that outrages the nation. The question still remains, how many people know the truth, but still choose to remain silent? Shayla Condor was born on April 7, 1998, in Tarma, a city in Peru's Junín region. She is the eldest daughter of Maximo and Elsa, who later had another daughter. From a young age, Shayla was known for her love of animals and nature. When she became a teenager, her family moved to the Santa Anita neighborhood in Lima, hoping for better opportunities. There, Shayla completed high school and trained as a secretary. She then worked as a cashier for a restaurant owned by her relatives. In her free time, Shayla helped with household chores, especially caring for the animals. On the morning of November 13, 2024, she left home as usual, taking a few personal items and saying goodbye to her aunt. She promised to return soon. That day, she wore a blue blouse, blue jeans, sneakers, and a pink shoulder bag. That evening, Shayla was scheduled to start her shift at the restaurant but did not show up. Her family called her several times, but she did not answer the phone, which was completely out of character for her. Worried, her mother reported the matter to the police, but they refused to take the case, even though under Peruvian law, missing person cases must be investigated. The police also believed that Shayla was an adult and might just be out with her boyfriend. However, her mother, Elsa, sensed something was wrong and went back to look for her daughter herself. Later, a friend of Shayla's found her computer and discovered that the messaging app was still open. The last messages were with a man named Darwin. They discussed Shayla helping him take care of his dog. The messages do not show any romantic relationship. They are merely work-related agreements. Darwin offered to pay in cash and arranged to meet on Wednesday, November 13, at his apartment in the Las Praderas neighborhood of Comas. Although their exchange seemed normal at first, a few details stood out. When Shayla asked to receive the payment by card, Darwin insisted on paying in cash. She also said she could only stay until 4 p.m., but he invited her to stay longer and drink. Concerned, Shayla's family looked into Darwin and discovered he was a 25-year-old police sergeant who worked in the Turna unit, known for undercover and surveillance operations. At that time, he was assigned to the Green Squad, which focused on street crime and banned substance trafficking. The next day, Shayla's family went back to the police and shared everything they had learned about Darwin. Even then, the authorities refused to investigate, claiming the case was outside their jurisdiction. When the family went to the police station in Comas, their complaint was rejected again. Officers even warned them they could face defamation charges if Shayla turned up. The police also denied knowing Darwin personally. Despite this, the family pressed for security camera footage from Darwin's building, but their request was denied. It was only on Friday, November 15, that Elsa managed to get the police to officially record Shayla as missing. A police officer later called Darwin to ask about Shayla. He admitted to seeing her, but said she had left the apartment that same day. On Sunday night, November 17, residents of Darwin's building reported a strong, unpleasant smell coming from his apartment. Police officers soon arrived, accompanied by Elsa. When they entered the apartment, they made a horrifying discovery. Shayla's dismembered remains were found in a suitcase under the bed and in a plastic bag in the bathroom. The scene suggested a carefully planned crime, with Darwin as the main suspect. However, there was no direct evidence in the apartment proving Darwin had been there. In her first public statement, Elsa criticized the police for ignoring her pleas. She believed Shayla might still be alive if officers had acted quickly and searched Darwin's apartment the same day she found her daughter's messages. Later, it was discovered that others had also been in Darwin's apartment after Shayla's visit. The place had been rented for a party held from Friday to Saturday. November 16, police identified those individuals as students from the State Technical University of Maritime Studies. During questioning, the students confirmed they had used the apartment but claimed they noticed nothing unusual. Lacking direct evidence, police released them. Police Commissioner Ronald Nunes, who led the Comas District Police Station and oversaw Shayla's case, testified that he had never met Darwin. This statement was confirmed by other officers at the station, the very same ones who had previously refused to accept Elsa's complaint on the grounds that there were no signs Shayla had been kidnapped or was in danger. As time passed, the investigation grew more complicated, and Shayla's family continued to seek answers. Eventually, residents of the Las Praderas complex told police that disturbing incidents had previously occurred in Darwin's apartment. 3 young women had accused Darwin and 2 other police officers of drugging them with spiked drinks and illegal substances before abusing them. According to the women, the events occurred on January 28, 2023. 3 friends had gone to Darwin's apartment, though only one knew him personally. 2 other members of the Peruvian National Police were also present. The women admitted to drinking alcohol but said it was not excessive. Around midnight, one woman felt ill, and Darwin suggested she rest in another room. A few hours later, another woman said it was time to leave, but one of the officers called her boring and offered her another drink. Darwin prepared the drink, and she accepted. After drinking it, she lost consciousness. When the first 2 women regained consciousness, they realized something was wrong and fled the apartment. From the street, they called the police. At around 6 o'clock a.m., officers arrived and entered the apartment. Inside, they found the 3rd woman unconscious on Darwin's bed. Darwin claimed she was his friend. During the investigation, the first woman identified one of Darwin's colleagues as the man who assaulted her. The second woman also said she had been abused. The 3rd woman said she could not remember what had happened or who might have touched her. Although criminal charges were filed, forensic tests did not find any physical evidence confirming the abuse. As a result, investigators requested the case's dismissal. Darwin was arrested and spent just over 2 weeks in custody. While prosecutors pushed for his continued detention, the court rejected their request. Ultimately, police leadership suspended Darwin from duty for 6 months. The case files showed that delays in the investigation and disciplinary proceedings allowed him to keep working as a police officer. The 2 other officers implicated in the case were also accused but remained in active service. When Darwin's name resurfaced in the media, the 3 women and those involved in the January 2023 case released a public statement. They emphasized that their case remained unresolved and that justice had yet to be served. One of the women said that if things had gone differently, she could have suffered the same fate as Shayla. She also revealed that Darwin had been involved in other possession. Similar incidents. One of these occurred in March 2024. On that occasion, she agreed to meet him for a walk on the beach, but he convinced her to go back to his apartment, as before. She lost consciousness after drinking something he offered her. When she woke up, she was naked in his bed, with her clothes scattered on the floor. She managed to escape and return home, though she suffered from dizziness and severe headaches for the rest of the day. Feeling ashamed, she did not file a police report. Only after Darwin's name reappeared in the news did she, like other victims, publicly say that he belonged in prison. Although it was still uncertain whether there were more victims, Darwin's pattern of behavior had become clear. Those who knew him agreed that he acted deliberately and with calculation, never impulsively. Growing evidence suggested that Shayla's death had not been an accident. Eventually, her family obtained surveillance footage from the Las Praderas apartment complex. The first recordings showed Shayla entering the building, with Darwin opening the door for her while holding his white dog. Sometime later, the footage captured Shayla again, this time walking through the hallway, carrying the same dog. These were the last known images of her alive. Soon after, Shayla's family lawyer, Aaron Alamán, filed a formal complaint with the Peruvian National Police. He stated that officers had ignored Shayla's mother's pleas and failed to act in a case that clearly showed signs of femicide from the beginning. Meanwhile, Darwin continued to work for the police force, even being assigned to ensure security at the Economic Forum, making it more difficult to monitor him. Eventually, he went into hiding. When this was discovered, Shayla's family's lawyer contacted the Ministry of the Interior and Interpol, requesting an international arrest warrant for him. The case drew widespread attention, and Darwin's photo was distributed across the country. But by then, it was too late. His phone records placed him in the San Juan de Lurigancho district. Police carried out an extensive search, checking more than 20 hotels in the area, but they did not find him. On November 19, 2024, police received an anonymous tip about a man resembling Darwin staying in room 30 of the La Perla Hotel. Officers responded immediately and discovered the body of a young man inside. His neck was tied to a television stand, and he had deep cuts on his wrists. Darwin's identification card and police badge were found nearby, but there was no weapon in the room. The scene appeared suspicious. Hours later, a video emerged on social media, allegedly filmed by the same police officers who discovered Darwin's body and took him to hospital. Around the same time, former Prime Minister Ana Jara publicly questioned the circumstances of Darwin's death. According to the testimony, when the body was discovered, it was completely stiff, indicating that Darwin had been dead for many hours. Therefore, taking him to the hospital was unnecessary. The investigation later confirmed that Darwin had been dead for at least several hours before the police arrived at the scene. However, the police officers claimed that they believed Darwin was still alive and acted to avoid responsibility for his death. Few believed this explanation. Their actions were viewed as a serious breach of protocol. Regulations required them to wait for detectives, and Colonel Ricardo Espinosa, head of the investigations unit, confirmed that protocol had been violated. These inconsistencies led to speculation in the media that Darwin may have been murdered. A later forensic report confirmed that Darwin had died 8 to 10 hours before his body was taken to the clinic. This deepened public suspicion and led the Congress of the Republic of Peru to summon Interior Minister Juan José Santibáñez to testify. Santibáñez stated that the police officers who handled Darwin's case might have neglected their duties. He also pledged to conduct an internal investigation to find out why the main suspect had remained on the force despite numerous complaints. Former Minister of Women's Affairs, Gloria Montenegro, commented that Peru had become a country that permits violence against women. Soon after, new inconsistencies appeared in the case. It was unclear how Darwin had managed to check into the hotel. If he had used his ID, why hadn't the hotel owners contacted the police immediately, given that his face was already widely known? Shayla's family later demanded official confirmation of the young man's identity through DNA testing. They wanted to be certain the body was Darwin's. On November 23, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, The Peruvian National Police came under renewed public pressure. Possibly as a result, Interior Minister Santibáñez ordered that Darwin's body should not receive any honors. He was eventually buried in a private cemetery in Uncu. Later, both police stations that Shayla's family had approached were investigated by Peru's Supreme Public Prosecutor's Office. The station chiefs were required to submit certified copies of the personnel files of all officers on duty during the days when the Condor family tried to file a missing person report for Shayla. On November 24, Minister Santibáñez appeared on a Sunday television program. He admitted that his colleagues had mishandled the situation and announced a joint initiative between the Ministry of the Interior and the Ministry of Women's Affairs, a campaign to train police officers and improve their response to cases of disappearance and violence against women. At the end of November, Shayla's mother, Elsa, made a strong statement expressing her outrage at the complete silence from the Ministry of Women's Affairs. She said that since her daughter's death, she had not received a single phone call or any expression of support. Left to deal with her grief alone, she sought psychological help herself and insisted that her youngest daughter, only 14 years old, also needed therapy. In early December, authorities announced a full investigation into the police officers who refused to take the missing person report and those who violated protocol when discovering Darwin's body. Meanwhile, the lawyer for Shayla's family, Aaron Alaman, said they were considering filing a complaint with the Human Rights Commission. He stressed that the family's goal was not only to hold individuals accountable, but also the entire relevant authorities. Alaman also criticized the police's handling of the case. He pointed out that the luminol test in the apartment where Shayla was killed was conducted 3 days after her body was found, which could have compromised key evidence. Meanwhile, large protests have erupted in the city, demanding justice for Shayla and denouncing the actions of the authorities, who are said to be obstructing the investigation. Women's organizations across social media voiced their distrust of the police. The case had gained so much attention that rumors began circulating online, falsely claiming that Darwin was involved in an organ trafficking network and that Shayla might have been one of the victims. On December 6, the public prosecutor's office released the official autopsy results from the Central Morgue in Lima. The report confirmed that all of Shayla's organs were intact, disproving the organ trafficking rumors. However, it also stated that the exact cause of death could not be determined, sparking a new wave of public concern. Shayla's family learned about the autopsy results from the media instead of being informed directly. The next day, their lawyer issued a new statement accusing the police of mishandling evidence. Alaman highlighted that access to the security camera footage from the apartment complex where Shayla was murdered had been blocked. He said he went to the scene to obtain copies of the recordings, but the district attorney refused to release them to the family or their lawyers. No date had been set for an official review of the footage, which Alaman believed could be critical for reconstructing the events and identifying accomplices. On January 25, 2025, Alaman issued another statement announcing that prosecutors had received a new video that could drastically change the investigation. The footage showed Darwin entering a police station just days before Shayla's body was found. Specifically, on the same day, her mother, Elsa, tried to file the missing person report. This evidence indicated that the officers who refused to take Elsa's report not only recognized Darwin, but intentionally concealed his presence. It also showed that those same officers had tried to destroy records referring to him. According to Alaman, Darwin should have been arrested immediately the day Elsa contacted the police. Because this did not happen, the officers involved could now face charges for aiding and abetting a crime. The current investigation is divided into 3 main directions: the murder of Shayla, Wilhelm in Latham, and Raum, the misconduct of the officers, and the allegation that Darwin's death was a case of homicide. The officers who found his body are now facing criminal charges for violating procedures, concealing evidence, and abusing their authority. Although they have not been charged with murder, international arrest warrants have been issued to prevent them from fleeing. Meanwhile, the authorities have begun a police reform program aimed at modernizing the force and dismissing any officers involved in criminal acts. Had these reforms been in place earlier, Darwin would have been removed from the force after the 2023 incident, and Shayla might still be alive today.
On October 30, 2011, David Swift reported his wife, Karen, missing after returning home from a Halloween party the previous night. That night, Karen had come home, put their daughter Ashley to bed, and slept with her. However, when David woke up the next morning, Karen was gone. Karen Swift was a 44-year-old mother of 4 from Dyersburg, Tennessee. She was cheerful and worked multiple jobs, including cleaning houses and teaching aerobics, to support her family. Friends described her as devoted and selfless, often prioritizing others' needs over her own. Despite her efforts to create a stable environment for her children, Karen's marriage to David was marked by conflict. David's controlling behavior became more evident. Friends observed that he was not supportive of Karen working outside the home, which increased tensions between them. David's actions became more erratic as he dealt with jealousy and insecurity about Karen's independence. Reports indicate that he started stalking her during outings and confronted her about her interactions with friends. This atmosphere of tension and control set the stage for the events that followed. Karen and David's relationship was marked by infidelity from both partners. David had previously had an affair that led to the birth of another child. Although they reconciled, their trust remained fragile. In October 2011, Karen filed for divorce due to ongoing marital issues, just 3 weeks before she vanished. This filing was a significant shift in their relationship, causing increased tension at home. David reportedly reacted poorly to the divorce, feeling threatened by Karen's desire for independence. On the night of October 29, 2011, Karen Swift went to a Halloween party in her small town of Dyersburg. She received a call from Ashley to pick her up from a friend's house late that night and fell asleep next to her when they returned home. In the early morning hours of October 30, 2011, David Swift called the police to report that his wife, Karen Swift, was missing. He expressed concern for her safety and was worried about where she might be. This call initiated a formal investigation into Karen's disappearance, prompting the police to gather information about her last known activities and interactions before she went missing. Around 3 p.m. on October 30th, police began their search for Karen Swift. They found her car abandoned on the side, about a quarter mile from her family's home. The car had a flat tire due to a rusty screw lodged in it. When officers inspected the vehicle, they found no signs of foul play inside, but noted that Karen's keys and purse were missing. Forensic tests on the car did not reveal any blood or evidence of a struggle. The discovery of the abandoned car raised more questions about Karen's whereabouts and prompted investigators to widen their search in the nearby areas. David stated that he last saw Karen around 2 a.m. when she came home with their daughter, Ashley, after a Halloween party. David told the police that both Karen and Ashley went to bed shortly after arriving home. Later, during additional police interviews, David mentioned that he briefly checked on Ashley to ensure she was safe before going back upstairs to sleep. His version of events raised suspicions among investigators about the timeline of Karen's disappearance and whether he was involved. He also claimed he did not know of any plans Karen might have had for that night and was confused about her sudden absence. Witnesses reported a pattern of controlling behavior from David toward Karen. Friends described his jealousy and possessiveness, mentioning that he would often only call Karen while she was out with friends. They also noted instances of David stalking Karen, leading to serious confrontations in their relationship. These behaviors raised red flags about Karen's safety and were a significant part of the investigation into her disappearance. Detectives gathered evidence and recognized how crucial testimonies were for grasping the complexities of Karen and David's troubled marriage. After Karen went missing, David approached law enforcement and offered to assist in the search for his wife. Notably, he arrived at the local police station using crutches, claiming that he had re-injured his knee, which he had previously operated on a few months prior. The timing of this injury, coinciding with his wife's disappearance amidst their troubled relationship, raised suspicions. On December 10, 2011, the investigation into Karen Swift's disappearance took a significant turn when her remains were found in a cemetery less than 3 miles from the Swift family home. two hunters made the discovery and promptly informed the police. Investigators quickly arrived to secure the area, and forensic analysis later confirmed that the remains were those of Karen Swift. An autopsy revealed that Karen had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, which was ruled a homicide. This finding changed the nature of the investigation from a missing person case to a homicide case. The autopsy showed that the trauma Karen suffered would have been deadly. However, because a significant amount of time had passed since her disappearance, figuring out the exact details of her death was difficult. Investigators observed that there were no signs to suggest that the murder took place at the cemetery. It seemed Karen's body had been moved there after she died. Finding her remains brought renewed attention to David Swift as a suspect, particularly because the nature of her injuries and the location of her body raised important questions about his potential involvement. Investigators started to examine David's actions and statements more carefully, looking for any evidence that could connect him to her death. They discovered that Karen had obtained a second cell phone to prevent David from tracking her, which indicated her wish for privacy amid their troubled relationship. During the investigation, David claimed he didn't know about this second phone. However, authorities found that the number was saved in his work phone. During interviews with investigators, David seemed more concerned about Karen's actions than about her well-being. The detective pointed out that David's fixating on his wife's supposed drinking and partying suggested he might be hiding something. However, despite these observations, investigators faced challenges in finding physical or eyewitness evidence that connected David to the homicide, which hindered the progress of the investigation. In the months after Karen disappeared, David moved to Alabama and got remarried. He stayed involved in raising their daughter, Ashley, but did not provide any new information about Karen's case. Ashley wanted to learn more about what happened to her mother but felt increasingly hopeless about finding any answers. Authorities looked into David's claims about changes in Karen's behavior, particularly regarding her new friendships. Investigators examined this narrative to see if it was relevant to her disappearance. From December 16 to 20, 2011, forensic examinations took place at both the Swift home and Karen's vehicle. Investigators found no evidence of foul play in the house but noticed some mess in Karen's bedroom. They also found 7 gallons of bleach, which David claimed were for cleaning after a neighbor's dog poisoning incident. As the investigation continued in January 2012, law enforcement made public appeals for information about Karen's disappearance and death, hoping to find witnesses who had seen her or knew where she was last seen. However, the lack of solid evidence against David slowed the progress of the case. Authorities pursued various leads and collected testimonies suggesting David's possible involvement in Karen's murder. The investigation remained open throughout 2011 and 2012 as they worked to achieve justice for Karen Swift. On August 8, 2022, David Swift was charged with first-degree premeditated murder in connection to his wife's death, representing a major breakthrough in a case that had been unresolved for over a decade. This arrest surprised many in the community and Karen's family, who had struggled for years with uncertainty surrounding her disappearance. Ashley Swift, Karen's daughter, voiced her confusion and distress regarding her father's arrest. After years without a clear suspect, she found it hard to cope with the sudden shift in the investigation. The arrest also deeply affected the Dyersburg community. For over 10 years, residents had closely followed the case, often discussing it in search of answers about Karen's fate. The investigation's stagnation left many feeling frustrated and hopeless. Danny Goodman, the prosecutor at the time, believed that earlier investigators in Karen's case were waiting for a key piece of evidence that could prove David's guilt. However, as the case developed, it became clear that such evidence did not exist. The investigation was interrupted by global issue, causing everything, including Karen's case, to come to a standstill. Instead of halting their work, the prosecutors seized this time to examine about 30 large bins of files related to Karen's murder. Goodman confirmed that they never discovered any crucial evidence against David, but they did find that the case resembled a puzzle with a clear motive. Goodman was revealed that throughout their relationship, David had managed to control nearly every aspect of Karen's life. However, he began to realize that he was losing that grip. The combination of losing control, Karen's social activities, and the impending divorce increased his frustration, ultimately leading him to plot her murder. The prosecution built a clear case regarding the murder of Karen Swift. Here's how they believe the events unfolded. On October 30th, Karen received a call from Ashley, Swift picked her up, and they both returned home, eventually falling asleep together in bed. While they were asleep, David moved Ashley to another room and then carried out his plan. He dragged Karen to the garage, brutally stomped on her head to make her death look like the result of an abduction. Afterward, he placed Karen's body in the car, drove to the cemetery, where he disposed of her body and covered it up to create the illusion that she had been kidnapped. In the days that followed, David approached the authorities and offered to assist in finding his wife's killer. The prosecution noted that he visited the authorities using crutches to suggest he could not have dragged Karen's body. He explained that he was on crutches due to a knee injury he had sustained after surgery months earlier. The prosecutors dismissed the idea that Karen left on her own or was abducted, arguing that several unlikely assumptions would need to be true for this theory to make sense. For example, if Karen had left voluntarily, she would have needed to have plans to meet someone, but there was no evidence of this. Additionally, if she didn't leave on her own, it was puzzling why she would move Ashley to another room. Another important factor to consider is that toxicology reports showed Karen had taken Benadryl before going to sleep. Benadryl is a sleep aid, so if Karen intended to go out after dropping Ashley off, it's puzzling why she would take a sleeping pill beforehand. To strengthen their theory of an alleged crime, prosecutors presented a substantial amount of evidence, most of which was circumstantial and gathered over 10 years ago. During the trial, it was shown that Karen's secret phone had no activity after she got into bed with Ashley. However, a forensic analysis revealed that the phone had been used and that a voicemail was called at 9:55 a.m. on October 30th. By this time, several hours had elapsed, and investigators had not yet located either Karen or her phone. Additionally, it was discovered that the phone had been connected to the family's Wi-Fi, and the only adult at home when the call was made was David. To support their claim that David faked an injury, the prosecution cited a neighbor's testimony. The neighbor reported seeing David move hay bales weighing around 60 pounds without using crutches. The prosecution put forward a circumstantial case suggesting that David committed murder. However, the defense challenged these allegations. The claims against David were primarily based on the idea that he was a controlling husband. His lawyer, Daniel Taylor, offered a different point of view, arguing that David was not trying to dominate Karen's life but was genuinely worried about his partner. During the trial, it was revealed that Karen struggled with alcoholism and partying. One neighbor reported finding her passed out and naked on their sofa during a party, which led to David being called to pick her up. Testimony suggested that Karen was involved in a buy and sell escort services ring and was interested in dating other men. The defense attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to support the state's claims about the murder. He pointed out the inconsistency of a murder by stomping if there was no blood found in the garage or the car. He also challenged the prosecution's assertion that David staged an attempted abduction, noting there was no evidence to suggest he left the house that night. Taylor emphasized another critical point: the medical examiner, who originally determined the cause of Karen's death, no longer believed that she had been stomped on the head. The defense maintained that David, who was injured and on crutches, could not have stomped on Karen's head even if it had occurred, as his injured leg could not support his weight while attempting to stomp with the other leg. This argument was further supported by David's physical therapist, who testified that David had significant difficulty walking and lifting. The prosecution had presented a photo of bleach located near the pool, but Taylor argued that this evidence was not strong enough. The defense lawyer dismissed the idea that blood could have been cleaned up with bleach. Ashley contested the prosecution's claims, asserting that it was her mother who moved her to another room. Although her memory of the event was challenged, she insisted she recognized her mother's touch and firmly believed it was Karen who did it. Furthermore, Ashley argued that her father's injury was sufficient to counter the prosecution's assertion that he had attacked Karen. She pointed out that Karen was athletic, and at the time of the murder, her father was physically unable to overpower her. To highlight David's innocence, Taylor pointed out that the phone mentioned by the prosecution was based on unreliable evidence. He emphasized that David's condition made it impossible for him to have committed the murder, especially given the tenuous link between the phone and the crime. It is possible that Karen left her secret phone at her house after taking a sleeping aid, which could explain its presence. Furthermore, the defense argued that David was worried about his partner. So, he has called her to check her voicemail and locate her. The weakest part of the case against David Swift was the lack of physical evidence. Investigators found no incriminating evidence at the house, in the vehicle, or on David himself. There was also no murder weapon, leading prosecutors to suggest that David had used his foot, despite his visible physical limitations. Throughout the trial, David's defense maintained, despite the state's objections, that the charges were influenced by political motives. They argued that the sheriff and district attorney, both up for re-election, felt pressured to pursue the case without any direct evidence linking David to the crime. When the jury finished deliberating, they delivered an unexpected verdict. David Swift was acquitted of first-degree and second-degree murder, as well as attempted first-degree and second-degree murder. However, they could not reach a unanimous decision on the charge of voluntary manslaughter, and ultimately informed the judge of their deadlock. This indecision regarding the voluntary manslaughter allegations resulted in a mistrial in June 2024. Since then, there have been new developments in David Swift's case. His ex-wife, Kelly Essman, has accused him of stalking her. In an interview, Kelly shared that she met David on a dating site 3 years after Karen's death, and they married in 2016. In October 2024, the Tennessee Court of Appeals rejected a request from David's legal team to dismiss the voluntary manslaughter charge related to Karen's case, which he has pleaded not guilty to. This charge will be addressed in a new trial. David is currently in custody, waiting for the trial concerning the voluntary manslaughter charge, while also facing separate stalking charges from his ex-wife in Alabama. The complexities of both cases are being reviewed as everyone involved seeks justice. As for Ashley, she says she wants justice for her mother, but she also wants her father to come home and find a normal life. Meanwhile, Karen's friends are no longer sure what they believe. The tragic case of Karen Swift remains a haunting mystery in Dyersburg, Tennessee, marked by loss, suspicion, and lingering questions. Karen, a devoted mother whose vibrant spirit touched many, was taken too soon, her life ended by a brutal act that shattered her family and community. The investigation, spanning over a decade, pointed to her husband, David Swift, whose controlling behavior and questionable actions fueled suspicion, yet the absence of definitive evidence left justice elusive. The 2024 trial, ending in acquittals on murder charges and a mistrial on voluntary manslaughter, underscored the case's complexity, leaving Karen's daughter Ashley torn between seeking truth and longing for her father's return. Now, David faces a new trial and separate allegations. Karen's memory endures through those who loved her, a poignant reminder of the fragility of trust and the enduring quest for answers in the face of tragedy.
Sarasota, Florida, a peaceful, safe, family-friendly city where life was calm and easygoing. But on November 7, 1997, that peace was torn away forever. Inside a suburban home, a brutal crime occurred that shocked the community. The victim was Sheila Belush, 35 years old. She was found dead, lying face down. Her right leg straight, air left bunt. Her lower face and chest bore fatal wounds. A haunting, bloody scene. But the most haunting detail was not the crime itself, but the children, not yet able to speak, crawling through their mother's blood, screaming in despair. Who was the killer? Why did he target Sheila? A devoted mother who loved her family dearly. Whoever the killer is, they have a clear objective: to kill Sheila. And what began as a seemingly enduring mystery soon unfolded into a shocking tale of betrayal, greed, and cold-blooded cruelty. Sheila Belush was born on October 19, 1962, in Topeka, Kansas. From a young age, she was known for her striking looks, and more importantly, her relentless determination. She never backed down from challenges, and people admired her resolve. After high school, she worked as a receptionist at a law firm, but her ambitions stretched far beyond the front desk. She dreamed of a life built on love, stability, and success. That dream seemed within reach when she met Alan, a man who appeared to be everything she wanted. Alan was attractive, polite, articulate, and charming. Their relationship moved quickly. After just 3 dates, he proposed, swept up in the romance. Sheila said yes. They married in 1982 and settled in Salem, Oregon. They soon had 2 daughters, Stevie and Daryl. From the outside, their life looked ideal. But Sheila didn't yet see the truth behind Alan's carefully crafted image. Born on June 5, 1955, in Eugene, Oregon, Alan had grown up with a single mother who was deeply unstable and violent. His childhood was brutal. His mother once beat him with a stick, breaking his cheekbone and fracturing his ribs. In another horrifying incident, she doused him with gasoline and tried to set him on fire. Those experiences left deep physical and emotional scars and helped shape him into a man driven by bitterness, deceit, and a need for control. Sheila believed she had married a dependable partner, but after the wedding, Alan's behavior told a different story. He was ambitious, but his ambition was fueled by greed. He planned to build a chain of electronic stores and created an impressive-looking business proposal, confident and persuasive. Alan took the plan to Sheila's father, Francis Anthony Walsh. Francis, impressed by his son-in-law's confidence, invested everything. His savings and even properties transferred into Alan's name, trusting the venture would grow the family's wealth. But all the promises quickly fell apart. Instead of investing, Alan spent lavishly, eating at fancy restaurants, buying expensive suits, living beyond his means. Within a year, the business failed. The Francis family went bankrupt. Their savings depleted. Sheila was devastated. She had trusted Alan, and he had ruined her family. Still, she stayed with him. Her loyalty gave him a chance to start over. The family moved to San Antonio, Texas, for a fresh start. There, Alan reinvented himself. Even changing his last name to Blackthorne, he launched a new business selling muscle stimulation devices at steep markups, targeting wealthy clients, especially doctors. He thrived. Charismatic and persuasive, he won over even skeptical buyers. In a short time, he rebuilt his fortune, indulging in luxury cars, designer shopping, and the lifestyle he'd always wanted. But the marriage was falling apart. Sheila could no longer ignore Alan's darker side. His need for control extended to their personal life, where his unusual demands for intimacy created growing tension. Sheila, the strong, determined woman who once loved Alan, begins to constantly think about escaping. Divorce shifted from a distant thought to her only path forward. Alan didn't seek intimacy. He sought domination, humiliation, and pain. He pursued elaborate, power-driven encounters with other women and demanded that Sheila watch. At first, she complied, hoping to save the marriage for her family's sake. But over time, the emotional strain became unbearable. The confident, vibrant woman, she had been faded into someone anxious, fearful, and deeply unhappy. Sheila eventually left the marital bedroom, unable to endure Alan's demands any longer. Her withdrawal enraged him, and the abuse escalated. What began as verbal cruelty turned violent. On one occasion, Alan forced her head into a toilet, attempting to drown her. On another, he beat her severely. Sheila reported these attacks to the police, not yet realizing that Alan had a history of similar abuse in past relationships. He had been married before, and both ex-wives suffered the same pattern of cruelty. In 1987, after 5 tumultuous years, Sheila reached her breaking point. They divorced, but the split launched a decade of legal warfare, custody battles over their daughters. Daryl and Stevie grew vicious, with each side accusing the other of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Even after both remarried, the hostility continued. In 1993, Sheila found happiness with salesman Jamie Belushi. They married and moved to Sarasota, Florida, hoping to escape Alan's toxic influence. 2 years later, Sheila gave birth to quadruplets. Sometimes it seemed as if the stormy past had receded into the distance. But Alan did not let go. Losing custody of his daughters infuriated him, and watching Sheila build a new life only deepened his obsession. He hires a private investigator to search for Sheila's family in Florida. Once he had their address, he began plotting revenge. He confides in Daniel Rocha, a golfing buddy, a petty criminal struggling to support his family, who admires his wealth and status. Daniel looked up to Alan and agreed to help. Alan lied, claiming Sheila was abusing their daughters and needed to be punished. At first, he said he just wanted to hit Sheila, but soon he changed his mind. He wanted to kill her. Daniel knew people who would take such a job. With $14,000, he found a hitman willing to act, Jose Luis del Toro. On November 7, 1997, Jose drove to Sarasota in a car borrowed from his grandmother. Along the way, he stopped at a sporting goods store to buy camouflage clothing and later at a gas station to ask for directions. Jose eventually arrived at Sheila's house. He broke in, waiting with a gun in his hand, watching her tend to her children. For a moment, he hesitated. Sheila didn't resemble the abuser Alan described. She looked like a devoted mother amid the chaos of toddlers. Doubt crept in, and he considered leaving until Sheila saw him and screamed. He fired reflexively. The .45 caliber bullet struck her in the face, and she collapsed on the kitchen floor. To ensure she was dead, he grabbed a knife from the counter, stabbed her, and fled. He left behind a horrific scene. 6 children, 4 of them infants, crying and crawling through their mother's blood. The investigation moved quickly once detectives found key evidence. Jose made a mistake. Biological traces at the scene provided forensic leads, and a vigilant neighbor had written down the license plate of a suspicious car, an act that proved crucial. Jose fled to Mexico, but authorities tracked him down. He was captured and deported to the United States. In July 1999, Jose Luis del Toro pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and armed burglary. He received 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As investigators reconstructed the plot, more names surfaced through interrogations and court records. Jose's cousin, Sammy Gonzalez, cooperated with authorities and explained how the plan came together. He had recruited Jose for the killing, and his testimony implicated others. Court documents and subsequent guilty pleas revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Sammy Gonzalez ultimately pleaded guilty to solicitation of murder and was sentenced to 19 years in prison. But investigators didn't stop with the hired killer and the recruiter. Documents, witness statements, and evidence uncovered during the investigation led them to the man who had driven the plot, Alan Blackthorne, whose fixation on revenge set everything in motion. Alan consistently denied involvement, but the evidence told another story. Testimony described him as consumed by anger over his ex-wife Sheila's new life and the loss of custody of their children. Witnesses said he recruited acquaintances, promised money, and pushed for retaliation that escalated from threats to murder. Alan was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and domestic violence. Like Jose, he received 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole and was sent to a federal prison in Beaumont, Texas. Daniel Rocha, a friend and golfing partner who linked Alan with willing accomplices, was also ensnared. Described as a small-time criminal who admired Alan and needed money, Daniel was convicted for arranging the plot and received a life sentence without parole. The court determined the crime was not random, but the result of a calculated conspiracy fueled by bitterness and ending in brutality. Throughout the trials, testimony revealed the motives and methods, offers of payment, promises of rewards, and discussions about killing Sheila so that they could transfer custody of the children. Witnesses recounted talks about money and logistics. While the profound loss suffered by the children remained at the heart of every proceeding, Sheila was murdered, leaving 6 young children and a grieving family. Alan's motive was stark and toxic: rage, humiliation, and the need to control. After Sheila divorced him, won custody of their daughters, and built a new life in Florida with Jamie and their quadruplets, Alan saw her happiness as an unforgivable betrayal. He could not accept her independence or that she had moved on. In his mind, revenge was the only answer. For orchestrating the murder-for-hire plot, Alan received 2 life sentences without parole. Prison, however, did not end the turmoil. In 2001, he was attacked by a prison gang and barely survived, prompting authorities to transfer him for his safety. On November 18, 2014, at age 59, Alan died in federal custody. The cause of death was never publicly disclosed. The heaviest burden of his actions fell on Sheila's children. When Sheila was killed in 1997, her daughters with Alan, Stevie and Daryl, were just 13 and 11. Her 4 quadruplets with her second husband, Yamia Belush, are all just 2 years old. After her death, Jamie shouldered the enormous responsibility of raising all 6 children. With help from extended family, he worked to give them stability and guide them through the years of grief that followed. Over time, the children grew and found their own paths. Stevie, now in her late 32s, is noted for her strength and resilience, building a meaningful life and giving back through community work. Her story reflects perseverance. Daryl and the quadruplets have chosen privacy, focusing on healing away from public attention. Though Sheila's life ended in a senseless act of violence, those who knew her remember her warmth, kindness, and determination. She was a devoted mother who faced enormous challenges without wavering in her love for her children. Her legacy lives on in them, in their survival, growth, and resolve to move forward despite their unimaginable loss. In the quiet fishing town of Sitka, Alaska, violent crime was almost unheard of. Families left their doors unlocked, children roamed freely, and communities thrived on a sense of security that lasted for decades. But on a chilly spring night in May 1996, that illusion was shattered forever. 17-year-old Jessica, just one day past her birthday, and never made it home from her sister's party. What happened to her on that path? And why did justice take 24 long years to arrive, only to end in a way no one expected? Jessica Irene Bagan was born on May 3, 1979, and had 3 sisters. The Bagan family lived in the small town of Sitka, Alaska, a barely noticeable spot on the map. With a population of around 9,000, there are no major industrial or technological centers. Fishing has always been the main occupation for the locals. Sitka boasts a well-developed commercial fishery and recreational fish farming scene. Men, women, even children are familiar with fishing rods and the thrill of the catch from a young age. Jessica was no exception. Although she loved fishing, her true passion was cooking. She dreamed of attending college immediately after high school to become a professional chef. Jessica spent all her free time experimenting in the kitchen. She especially enjoyed baking pies with her mother before Thanksgiving. Among family and friends, Jessica was known not only for her culinary talents, but also for her independence, free spirit, and unwavering self-confidence. A few weeks before her 17th birthday, their dog went missing. Jessica and her family searched extensively, but eventually everyone gave up hope except for Jessica, who continued to believe and encourage her family. Finally, the dog was found, bringing a wave of happiness. On the afternoon of May 4, 1996, Jessica visited her older sister's trailer, which was located near their family home. Her sister had decided to throw her a birthday party, and the celebration went smoothly. Late that evening, Jessica decided to head home to make her curfew. She had about a kilometer to ride along the local park's bike path, which wound through a dense forest. It was already dark, but Jessica wasn't afraid. Her town was known for its safety. Petty theft was the most serious crime, and nothing violent had happened in decades. Unaware of the danger lurking ahead, she bravely rode home alone through the woods. When she missed curfew, Jessica's parents became concerned. Unfortunately, they had no way to contact her directly, as no one in the family owned cell phones at the time. However, her mother called her eldest daughter, who had hosted Jessica's party, on her landline. Jessica's sister confirmed that Jessica had left long ago. Surprised and alarmed that Jessica hadn't arrived home, Jessica's sister tried to reassure her parents, suggesting that she might have run into friends, stopped to chat, or extended the celebration. But this offered little comfort, as Jessica was always responsible and diligent, never late when she promised to be home. Missing curfew was completely out of character. Jessica's parents decided to waste no time and contacted law enforcement to report their daughter missing. Her father, George, went to the local police station to do so, returning home with the hope of seeing his daughter, hoping it was all a simple misunderstanding. But Jessica never showed up, and his anxiety only grew. At the station, the police took his report seriously and decided to investigate. Several officers immediately went to the trailer where Jessica's sister lived. They collected all the necessary information, including a description and photo of Jessica, a description of her clothing. They determined her usual route and then headed toward the bike trail that ran through the local park. However, it quickly became apparent that Jessica would not be found along that path. There were no tracks, so the search area was expanded. The police now combed the wooded area, but this too yielded no results. Exploring the area in the dark was difficult, so progress was slow. The search resumed the next day, but still yielded no results. On May 6, 1996, the situation changed when one of the search party members discovered a shirt. It was identical to the one Jessica had worn to her sister's party. Afterward, they began an even more thorough search of the surrounding area. 2 hours later, near the shirt, less than 100 meters from the bike path, one of the detectives noticed a disturbed patch of ground, as if it had recently been dug up. They decided to check it out. At a shallow depth, the body of a naked girl was found. The victim was lying on her side in a fetal position. It was obvious that she had been brutally attacked and had not died a natural death. She was easily recognized as 17-year-old Jessica Irene Baggin. The medical examiner's report revealed bruising under her eyes and several marks on her face, indicating she had been struck multiple times in the head. The ultimate cause of death, however, was strangulation. The blows appeared to be intended to stun. Disturbingly, investigators found dirt in Jessica's mouth and throat, suggesting her attacker may have shoved it in to silence her or pressed her face into the ground. Finger marks on her neck confirmed that the killer had strangled her with such force that her larynx was fractured. The assailant likely waited for her at the exit, beat her immediately, then dragged her back into the forest, abused her, and murdered her. DNA samples were collected from the body. The extent of the brutality and the teenager's death shocked all local residents. The Baggin family struggled to cope with the loss. During this time, they bonded and supported each other. But the only solace for everyone was the capture of the killer. On the day dedicated to Jessica's farewell, more than 1,500 people gathered at the local church. The community gathered not only to mourn, but to show support and to demand answers. The attack had shattered their sense of safety. Residents began avoiding the local park, and parents forbade their children from going there. Meanwhile, the police department was overwhelmed with calls from terrified townspeople, all desperate for updates. But investigators had no immediate answers. The detectives wasted no time. They immediately turned their focus to Jessica's closest circle of friends and acquaintances. She was outgoing and well-liked, with a wide network of friends, many of whom had been at her sister's party the night she disappeared. Several young men drew initial attention from investigators, all of whom were interviewed and asked to provide DNA samples for comparison with the evidence collected from Jessica's body. Among these suspects was the son of a police officer working on the case. Suspicion fell on him after Jessica's sister mentioned he had been flirting with Jessica at the party. He admitted he had admired her for a long time and had hoped to ask her out that night. Jessica, however, didn't give him a clear answer. He insisted he wasn't upset and had even offered to give her a ride home. Jessica declined. Despite the suspicions, the officer's son appeared genuinely devastated by Jessica's death. He cooperated fully with investigators, even voluntarily providing a DNA sample. When the results came back negative, he was completely cleared. But for the police, the investigation was far from over. Dozens of potential suspects still remained. Over the following days, More teens were interviewed and gradually eliminated through solid alibis or unmatched DNA. Then, 10 days after Jessica's murder, a strange turn of events occurred. A 34-year-old man named Richard Bingham walked into the police station. Richard was a laborer at a local community college. He lived a transient lifestyle aboard a small fishing boat moored in Sitka Harbor. Known as a heavy drinker, he often drank to the point of blacking out, though not typically violent. His intoxication sometimes led to reckless behavior, such as passing out in bushes or on benches. What alarmed police most was that Richard's makeshift houseboat was docked just a few hundred meters from the area where Jessica's body had been found. Richard wasn't there to provide information. Instead, he claimed he might have been responsible for Jessica's murder. Though he had no memory of it because of how drunk he'd been, he said he had woken up in the bushes near the park on the morning after Jessica disappeared. Later, upon hearing about the crime, he feared he might have been involved. Tearful and visibly shaken, he told investigators that he remembered throwing something heavy into the water that night, perhaps evidence, or even a body. But this didn't fit with Jessica's case. Water had played no role in her death. Still, the mention of missing personal belongings couldn't be ignored. A dive team searched the harbor, where Richard claimed he had tossed something, but all they found were empty beer bottles. Investigators pressed further. Richard's friends painted a clearer picture of him. A gullible man often teased by his drinking buddies. When the group read about crimes in the local paper, they jokingly accused him of being responsible for petty thefts or other mischief. Richard, easily convinced, would sometimes believe them. In one instance, he even returned fish to a store, insisting he had stolen them, only for the manager to check the security footage and tell him he hadn't taken anything at all. When news of Jessica's murder spread, Richard's friends made the same kind of joke, accusing him of the crime, but this time, he took it seriously. Consumed by guilt and self-doubt, and with little memory of that drunken night, he walked into the police station ready to confess to a murder he likely hadn't committed. Despite the absurdity of his story, detectives couldn't simply dismiss it. Richard admitted his alcohol addiction left him prone to reckless, forgetful actions. The confession didn't match the evidence, but investigators had no choice. They had to treat his words seriously and verify every detail. Richard was shown photographs of Jessica, but he didn't even recognize her. He then gave a description of her clothing that was completely inaccurate. Richard knew nothing about the victim's injuries or the cause of death. Despite all this, he continued to feel guilty. Detectives, still reviewing all the information, were in no hurry to rule him out. They decided to run several tests. A comparison of a stranger's hairs found on the deceased's body did not match Richard A. Comet Bling. A test of his bodily fluids also revealed a discrepancy. It was later discovered that Richard had been too far from the park when Jessica was attacked. He had been drinking on the other side of town at the time and only returned after midnight, at which point he had walked through the park and apparently fallen asleep in the bushes, as was his habit. Despite all of this, on May 15, 1996, Richard was arrested and charged with murder. He spent long hours in police custody, during which a confession was extracted. He was then sent to prison to await trial, which wasn't scheduled for another year. Initially, things went relatively well. Richard wasn't immediately placed in a cell with the general prison population. Instead, he was kept in a kind of protective quarantine that lasted for several months. However, after the preliminary hearing, he was moved to a general cell, and that's when the problems began. He later admitted to being bullied by other inmates, who sought to punish him for the murder of an underage girl and subjected him to repeated beatings. Richard later described this period as the most difficult of his life. When he appeared in court, his state-appointed defense attorney attempted to refute the charges and challenge the confession, arguing that it was false. A key piece of evidence presented was a video of the interrogation, which clearly showed the detectives exerting undue pressure on Richard. Furthermore, a psychiatrist who had previously worked with Richard testified that he had developmental disabilities, making him a vulnerable individual and explaining why the detectives' intimidation had such a significant impact. His defense attorney emphasized the coercive environment that led to the false confession. The most compelling arguments, however, were based on DNA tests and other inconsistencies. The DNA samples taken from the crime scene and Jessica's body did not match Richard's. The trial lasted 10 days. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours before acquitting Richard of all charges. He left the courtroom greatly relieved and vowed to abstain from alcohol. Shortly afterward, he asked his lawyer for a ride to the airport. Richard didn't want to remain in the area. Fearing that these events would incite vigilante violence, he headed to Seattle and then hitchhiked to Montana, where he decided to settle down. Although this chapter of Richard's story had ended well, the detectives were back to square one. Once again, without a suspect in Jessica's murder, repeated investigations yielded no results, and the case remained stagnant for months. Detectives were unable to identify anyone in Jessica's close circle who was potentially dangerous, prone to violence, or abusing alcohol or illegal substances. Jessica's family continued to hope that the perpetrator would soon be found, but their hopes dwindled as years of fruitless searching passed. The investigation reached a dead end. It was reopened several times, but each time, law enforcement officials were faced with insufficient evidence. More than 20 years passed. In February 2019, a cold case unit was formed, and the murder of Jessica Irene Baggin was among the most high-profile cases they took on. A young detective joined the team and introduced them to an innovative DNA research technique called genetic genealogy. By that time, 2 crimes had already been successfully solved in Alaska using this method. Inspiring optimism, initially, DNA samples collected during the 1996 investigation were sent to a lab to be compared with existing databases. But the comparison yielded no results. They then decided to submit the samples for genetic genealogy. This analysis revealed a partial match with a man named Steve Branch, but his DNA sample was not registered in any database, either police or civilian. Although the police had identified their new prime suspect, they now needed his DNA profile for comparison. They could approach Steve directly, hoping he would cooperate and voluntarily provide a sample for testing. However, the likelihood of this was slim. Surveillance might prove a more effective approach. Steve could be watched, waiting for him to discard a cigarette butt or leave a coffee cup in a cafe. A background check revealed that in 1996, just 2 months before Jessica's death, Steve had assaulted and abused a local grocery store worker. The victim was 18 years old. Unfortunately, comprehensive police databases were not yet in place, and routine DNA collection from criminals was not standard practice at the time. After the girl reported the assault, her family urged her to contact the police. Consequently, Steve was charged, but he denied abusing her, claiming the encounter was consensual. Lacking a firm conviction, the jury acquitted him on most counts. He was only ordered to pay legal costs to the victim's family. Because this was considered his first criminal offense, he was simply released. Steve claimed it was all a misunderstanding and promised to do better. This raised the question, why wasn't Steve considered a prime suspect after Jessica's death? Given the similarities in the criminal signatures of the 2 crimes, he should have immediately attracted detectives' attention. This probably did not happen because violent crime in Sitka is so rare that active police officers lack the necessary experience in such cases. He continued to live in Sitka, where he would later attack Jessica and take her life. For the next 14 years, he lived quietly, working, staying out of legal trouble. During this time, he started a family, later divorced his first wife. In 2010, Steve decided to change his life and moved to Arkansas. By 2019, he had remarried to a woman and had 2 children. By the time detectives turned their attention to him, Steve was 66 years old and working as an excavator operator. Investigators determined that he was 43 at the time of Jessica's murder. Now they were confident they were on the right track, but they needed to thoroughly investigate him and gather evidence linking him to the crime. In 2020, detectives arrived at an Arkansas police station. They planned to gather information and request a DNA sample from Steve, but obtaining irrefutable evidence required navigating bureaucratic hurdles. The police decided not to waste time and intended to speak with Steve in person. By this point, 24 years had passed since Jessica's murder. While Steve was calmly watching a football match on the sofa at home, the doorbell rang. Upon opening the door, He saw two law enforcement officers who immediately explained they were trying to solve a crime committed nearly 25 years earlier. Steve appeared confused, but confirmed he had lived in Sitka for most of his life before moving to Arkansas. He claimed he had no idea who Jessica was and had nothing to do with her murder. He even claimed he couldn't remember anything so horrific happening in his hometown. Naturally, this sounded implausible. Because Jessica's story was widely discussed within the local community, like a national tragedy, he simply couldn't ignore the case. In any case, the detectives didn't press the issue and asked for his DNA samples. They assured him this was routine, that they simply wanted to rule him out. But Steve refused. Just over half an hour after the investigators left, the Arkansas Police Department received a report from his wife. Distraught, she claimed to have found her husband in a remote part of their farm. He had driven there in his pickup truck and shot himself, leaving no confession or note, which left his family struggling to understand his actions. When detectives arrived, they found him dead with a gunshot wound to the head. Based on a warrant obtained, his DNA was collected. Further testing revealed a 100% match between Steve Branch's DNA profile and DNA found on Jessica's body, confirming he was guilty of abusing her. Unfortunately, he took the details of the murder with him to the grave, and we will never know the exact motive or other specific details of this case. Afterward, on August 10, 2020, the chief of the Sitka Police Department visited the Baggin family's home to inform them that Jessica's killer had finally been identified. Justice had been elusive, as Steve would never stand trial. The family reacted to this news with mixed feelings. Jessica's parents later shared their thoughts with reporters. The very next day, August 11, they held a press conference where the sheriff's department emphasized that after 24 years, they had finally solved the crime. It became the third case in Alaska to be solved through genetic genealogy. Richard Bingham, who spent just over a year behind bars for a crime he didn't commit, also commented on these events. He said he still suffers from the effects of his prison experience. He was never able to completely overcome his alcohol addiction and continued to drink frequently. By this time, he had developed multiple sclerosis. He continued to work odd jobs. Richard stated that he had erased his hometown from his life and had no intention of returning to Sitka, as it was the city that had ruined his life. Nearly 25 years later, he had still not received any compensation for his prison sentence, but he still hoped to rectify this with the help of his lawyer. In a Minnesota town where life seems peaceful, a young couple seems to be the perfect example of faith and devotion. Yevgeny and Lyuba Savinok were known for their discipline, strong church ties, and loving image to everyone around them. They looked like the ideal Christian family, but behind their warm smiles and Sunday prayers, a much darker reality existed, one that few would dare to imagine. The danger in Lyuba's life didn't come from a stranger. It lived within her own home, hidden behind the mask of love. Then, on a spring morning in 2016, inside the home she thought kept her safe, years of fear and false hope exploded into a tragedy so horrific it shattered the entire community. This story goes beyond a single marriage. It is about missed warnings, a stolen life, a broken family, and a system that believed an abuser could change until it was far too late. What really happened in the Savinok home? How did a loving husband become a calculated killer? And why were the signs ignored? The truth of this case reveals not only how one woman was lost, but also how many others remain unprotected in silence. Yevgeny Savinok was born in 1986 in Russia into a family of 9 children. His father was raised in a strict religious environment, deeply influenced by his grandfather, who had secretly served as a priest during the Soviet era. Because of this, the grandfather was arrested and imprisoned for several years. After his release, the family decided to leave Russia and immigrate to the United States, seeking religious freedom and a peaceful life. The Savinoks settled in Wilton, a small town in Minnesota, where they began anew. The older siblings attended local schools, while the younger ones quickly assimilated into the American language and culture. During his high school years, Yevgeny excelled in academics and sports. He wrestled competitively, frequently won tournaments, and later became an assistant coach and sports instructor. Known for his punctuality, rule following, and active role in his church, he was considered a model young man. Lyuba was born in Estonia in 1993. Her family also immigrated to the United States when she was a child, settling just a few miles from Wilton. She grew up in a religious family that valued hard work and family values. She was a good student, gentle, and avoided conflict. After school, she worked at a local company, helped her parents, and attended church regularly with her family. That's where she met Yevgeny. They participated in church events and volunteer activities, and over time their friendship deepened into a romantic relationship. Their wedding was blessed by the church and attended by relatives from both sides. To everyone who knew them, their marriage seemed solid and loving. Yevgeny was seen as reliable and strong-minded, while Lyuba was gentle and devoted. At first, their marriage appeared harmonious. Their families and church community viewed them as an exemplary couple. However, behind the warm exterior, there were deep conflicts. The strict religious upbringing that emphasized male authority and female submission became the foundation of their relationship. These beliefs strongly influenced Yevgeny's behavior and put Lyuba under pressure, trying to maintain faith in her beloved husband. The reality of their marriage was far from the initial peaceful image. After only a few months, Lyuba realized that the relationship was based on control, not mutual respect. Yevgeny insisted that Lyuba should stay home, claiming it was for her own good. But in truth, he didn't allow her to go out without permission. He grew angry whenever she made independent decisions. Gradually, Lyuba lost contact with her friends, and visits from her parents dwindled. She lived under constant scrutiny. Her phone was checked, her interactions restricted, and even small delays or missed calls were treated as signs of betrayal. Yevgeny's jealousy and desire to control became more intense. Over time, his controlling behavior turned violent. Lyuba tried to hide her injuries, explaining them away as accidents. Her family noticed the bruises, but she insisted everything was fine. Eventually, she contacted the police several times, reporting abuse and expressing fear for her safety. Each time, after authorities intervened, Yevgeny apologized and promised to change. Relatives and church leaders often urged her to forgive him and keep the marriage intact. Lyuba continued to believe and hope that eventually he would truly change. In 2012, they had their first child, Matthew. A year later, their daughter, Vivian, it was born. Lyuba hoped that fatherhood would calm Yevgeny. For a short time after Matthew's birth, he seemed gentler, helping at home and spending time with the children. But soon, his behavior returned to how it used to be. Yevgeny began drinking heavily, and when drunk, he became volatile. Even minor issues could enrage him. He would yell, destroy things, and make threats, and later pretend nothing had happened. Whenever Lyuba sought help, he pressured her to stop, using the children as leverage. He warned that if she left him, their family would fall apart. Over time, fear became a constant part of Lyuba's life. Their house, which should have been a place of safety, turned into a space filled with uncertainty. No one ever knew when his next outburst would come. By 2014, the situation had worsened dramatically. Yevgeny no longer hid his dependence on alcohol. He came home late and angry, often for no clear reason. Family members reached out to the pastor, hoping his guidance might help, but nothing changed. Outwardly, the Savinok family still appeared to be a devoted church-going household. Behind closed doors, however, tension suffused everything. Lyuba tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for the children's sake, but deep down, she knew their old life was gone. When the stress became unbearable, Lyuba was forced to do what she had feared for years, seek help. After one of Yevgeny's outbursts, during which he yelled, threw objects, and pushed her to the ground while threatening her. She called emergency services. The police documented the incident, and a judge issued a temporary protective order barring Yevgeny from approaching her. For Lyuba, this was the first step toward freedom, but also the beginning of new pressures. A few days later, church representatives visited her. A deacon and the pastor urged her to resolve family matters privately. They spoke about patience, humility, and a wife's duty to forgive, suggesting that calling the authorities brought shame to the congregation. Although Lyuba tried to explain that she was worried about her and her children's safety, they only responded with words like, "Faith can heal," or "A true wife saves her husband with love." During this time, Yevgeny called her daily, begging her to withdraw her complaint. At first, he promised to change, but soon his tone turned threatening. He warned her that if she did not drop the protective order, things would end badly. His threats became more specific. He said he would harm her and her family if she continued to disgrace him. Lyuba's parents pleaded with her not to see him, but their church leaders insisted that divorce was a sin. Feeling trapped between fear and religious pressure, Lyuba went to court and withdrew her statement. The police cautioned her it could put her in danger, but she feared both her husband's anger and her community's judgment. In their eyes, preserving the family was a duty, no matter the cost. Afterward, Yevgeny returned home. At first, he behaved calmly and seemed repentant, but it didn't last. The aggression soon returned. Each new incident made Lyuba lose more hope. When she turned to the pastor again, he told her that marriage is a test and that God never gives a person more than they can bear. These words shattered the last of her remaining faith. From then on, she stopped seeking help. She no longer called the police or confided in relatives. Every conflict began to feel unavoidable. The church that should have protected her only deepened her sense of isolation. Over time, she understood that any action she took without her husband's approval would be seen as defiance, and the little protection she once had disappeared entirely. By mid-2014, after another violent incident, Lyuba took her children and moved to her parents' house. The choice was painful, but fear had turned into exhaustion. With her family's support, she rented a small suburban home and began rebuilding her life. She found a job at a real estate company, a job that required her to interact with many people, but also allowed her, for the first time in years, to live a day without criticism or supervision. She took her children to school, spent time with her sister, and began to rediscover calm and happiness. Her family noticed her smile returning. She began to plan for the future, talking about stability and the desire for peace. Yevgeny saw Lyuba's departure as a betrayal. At first, he called, sent messages, and appeared at her home. When that didn't work, he changed approach, sending gifts through friends, attending her church, and asking the pastor to help reconcile them. He started what looked like a public attempt at redemption. He stopped drinking, got a job, and regularly attended church, telling everyone, including the children and Lyuba, that he had been spiritually reborn. During visits, he brought candy and small presents, and spoke gently, and promised to regain her trust. His attitude shifted from pressure to persuasion. He wrote long letters of apology, claiming he was a changed man. The pastor and church members encouraged Lyuba to forgive him, saying that God valued family unity. Even her parents, seeing his apparent transformation, hoped she might give him another chance for the children's sake. After months of hesitation, Lyuba agreed to keep contact on a limited level. They began seeing each other again but still lived apart. Yevgeny was calm, respectful, and didn't interfere with her work. His behavior seemed proof of real change. And by the end of the year, Lyuba decided to reconcile. In early 2015, Yevgeny moved back into Lyuba's life. He appeared transformed, calm, sober, and helpful around the house. In public, he spoke of faith and forgiveness, admitting his past mistakes. To their family and church community, he seemed genuinely reformed. Tired from years of fear and loneliness, Lyuba allowed herself to believe him. When he offered to move back in, she agreed. At first, Life did feel peaceful. Yevgeny worked part-time, went to church regularly, and joined Lyuba for Sunday services. The children were happy to have their father at home again. The house was calm. No yelling. No threats. Lyuba started to believe their family could heal. In November 2015, she discovered she was pregnant with their third child. She saw it as a sign of a fresh start and trusted that things would truly be different. However, the peace didn't last. Within months, Yevgeny's behavior began to change. It started with small complaints: how Lyuba spent money, who she spoke to, how she cared for the children. Then he turned controlling. He restricted her communication, forbade visits with friends, checked her phone, and accused her of disrespect. Arguments grew louder and more frequent. As their relationship unraveled, Yevgeny began drinking again. Lyuba tried to stay calm and avoid conflict, but the tension kept building. In early 2016, one confrontation turned violent. Despite her pregnancy, he assaulted her. She went to the authorities and received medical care for bruises and internal bleeding that endangered the baby. That same day, Lyuba was granted a protective order preventing Yevgeny from approaching her or the children. He was arrested and held in custody. During questioning, he denied the assault, calling it just an argument and insisting he never meant harm. He was later released on $3,000 bail, pending his trial, and temporarily living with his brother. Despite her family's concerns, Lyuba allowed Yevgeny to see the children, as long as a relative supervised them. She believed a father should have the chance to be part of his children's lives, even under strict monitoring. However, Yevgeny used the opportunity to continue to pressure her, appearing to comply with the rules on the surface, but actually wanting to maintain their relationship. Although her family had warned her that even limited contact could be dangerous, she hoped this would help avoid further conflict. The pregnancy was difficult. After the attack, she needed rest, but constant stress wore her down. By spring, her physical health had improved somewhat, though emotionally she remained anxious. Those close to her knew the danger had not disappeared. It was simply quiet. Yevgeny waited for a chance to reassert control, and his release on bond effectively allowed him access to Lyuba once more. The uneasy peace soon collapsed. Outwardly, the family seemed normal, but behind closed doors, tension was building toward another tragedy that no one could prevent. On the morning of May 16, 2016, Lyuba's house on the outskirts of Wilton looked peaceful. The children played in the living room, while Lyuba and her sister Elisa prepared breakfast in the kitchen. No one expected that the day would end in tragedy. Around 9 a.m., Yevgeny drove up to the house, saying that he wanted to see and play with the children. Lyuba agreed to let him in. However, Elisa immediately sensed that something was wrong. Yevgeny spoke slowly. His eyes were absent-minded. His gestures were awkward. He seemed drunk. However, Lyuba tried to keep calm and asked Elisa to let him play with the children in the yard. A few minutes later, Yevgeny returned inside. What began as a conversation turned into a heated argument. As voices rose, Elisa realized the situation was escalating. She stepped outside and called an ambulance, telling the dispatcher that her pregnant sister, Lyuba, was inside the house with a man who was behaving aggressively. While waiting for police, she heard shouting and then the sound of the door locking. She tried to get back inside but couldn't. Yevgeny had locked the house. Moments later, he emerged holding the children's hands and calmly led them to his car. Elisa ran to the neighbors for help. When police arrived, they forced the door open and found Lyuba. She had been brutally attacked, suffering 12 stab wounds, most to her chest and abdomen. She was in her final months of pregnancy. She was taken to the Baiji hospital, where doctors performed an emergency cesarean section to save the baby. However, the child only lived for a few minutes. That day ended a silent tragedy that had lasted for years. What seemed like a reconciliation turned out to be a pause in the face of an unimaginable tragedy, the death of a mother and her unborn child. Shortly after the attack, Yevgeny Savanok was arrested nearby. He was taken to the Wilton Police Department and then to the Beltrami County Jail. Within hours, he confessed. Investigators noted his calm demeanor. He didn't deny his actions and described them in detail. He admitted the attack was premeditated, planned over several months, driven by his inability to accept that Lyuba had left him. When asked about his motive, he said he felt betrayed and robbed of his family. He showed no real remorse, expressing regret only for how his actions affected the children. Psychological evaluations found him fully competent at the time of the crime, aware of his actions and in control of his behavior. He was charged with first-degree murder and the unlawful killing of an unborn child. The case against him included his confession, Elisa's eyewitness account, expert testimony, and autopsy results confirming that Lyuba died from 12 stab wounds to the chest and abdomen. The trial started in the fall of 2016. The Minnesota state prosecutor requested a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Yevgeny's defense attorneys argued that he acted under emotional distress and attempted to have the charges reduced. The trial lasted several months, repeatedly delayed by defense motions for additional psychological and mental health evaluations. By early 2017, both sides began plea negotiations. In February, prosecutors offered a deal if Yevgeny Savinok pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and to the unlawful killing of an unborn child, and his life sentence without parole would be changed to a fixed 65-year prison term. Yevgeny agreed. On February 2, 2017, the Beltrami County District Court found him guilty on both counts and imposed the 65-year sentence in a high-security Minnesota prison. Under state law, good behavior and participation in work programs could reduce his time served by nearly half. During the hearing, Yevgeny accepted responsibility for his actions, but said he was not seeking forgiveness. The judge emphasized that the crime had been premeditated and deliberate, carried out with full awareness of its consequences. However, the court acknowledged his confession and cooperation, upholding the plea deal. Lyuba's family reacted with anger. Her brother, Alexander Katanek, called the verdict mercy for a murderer and a disgrace to the system. The family believed that someone who had taken the lives of a pregnant woman and her unborn child did not deserve the chance of a reduced sentence. To them, the plea deal was a legal compromise, not real justice. Prosecutors later explained that the agreement avoided a long, emotionally exhausting trial, protected witnesses' mental health, and secured a guaranteed conviction without risking appeal delays. After sentencing, Yevgeny was moved to the Oak Park Heights maximum security prison. His attorneys filed an appeal for a review of his confinement and a possible sentence reduction, but the court rejected it, leaving the original sentence in place. For Lyuba's family, the legal process was over, but their grief remained. They had lost a daughter, a sister, and a grandchild. No prison term could bring them peace or restore the lives taken by violence and misplaced faith that an abuser could change. After the tragedy, Elisa Savinok, the only witness, became both the key witness in the case and the emotional support for her family. Her testimony was crucial to the prosecution, but the trauma left lasting effects. She underwent long-term treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder and later became guardian of Lyuba's children. Initially, Lyuba's parents were given custody, but due to their health and age, full-time care proved difficult. With their consent, Elisa petitioned for and was granted legal guardianship, allowing the family to stay united. Together, they created a stable, loving home, determined that their future would not be defined by the past. Later that year, a vigil was held in Wilton. Friends, relatives, neighbors, and church members gathered outside the house where the tragedy occurred. They lit candles, prayed, and shared memories of Lyuba and her unborn child. The vigil became more than a farewell. It served as a public reminder of the deadly consequences of ignoring domestic violence. After the investigation concluded, county police released a statement warning that lifting protective orders and trusting promises from individuals with a history of aggression can lead to devastating outcomes. The case received wide media attention and came to represent a broader societal issue: how fear, social pressure, and misplaced hope in an abuser's change can enable recurring violence. The Savinok family's story became a call to action. Advocacy groups used it to highlight the dangers of domestic abuse and to push for stronger victim protections and systemic reforms. Liuba's name became a symbol in campaigns demanding change and justice for survivors. For Elisa and her family, remembering Liuba has become a mission to speak out about what is often hidden. The tragedy may be over, but its effects still linger. It challenges us to think about society's responsibility in confronting violence. Why do fear and strict beliefs keep victims silent and bystanders inactive? In this story, faith, patience, and tradition slowly became a trap, where endurance blurred into surrender. Liuba will be remembered as a woman who just wanted a peaceful life. She loved her children, worked hard, tried to keep her home, and believed that kindness could move people. But that kindness did not save her, and instead left her with a painful lesson about the cost of silence and indifference. Now, 2 children grow up without their mother, a heartbreaking reminder that indifference can be as harmful as violence itself. The only way to break the cycle of fear is to speak out, seek help, and act before it is too late. In small towns like Red Bluff, California, during the early 1980 seconds, life was slow, familiar, and safe. Or at least it seemed that way. But in March 1983, that illusion was shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. 14-year-old Rachel Ward, a girl known for her gentle heart and radiant spirit, left for school on a rainy morning and never arrived. Hours later, her body was found abandoned on a lonely dirt road outside of town, savagely murdered. For many years, the identity of her killer was unknown, casting a dark cloud over Red Bluff. But determined investigators and advancements in science eventually revealed the person responsible for the crime. Rachel Ward was born on September 6, 1968. Into a warm and caring family. She had an older sister, Andrea, whom she admired deeply. The two shared a close bond, and Andrea described her younger sister as one of the kindest and brightest people she had ever known. The family lived in Red Bluff, California, a small rural town about 200 kilometers north of Sacramento, known for its ranches, orchards, and close-knit community. In the early 1980 seconds, with a population of only about 10,000, it was the kind of place where neighbors knew one another well. By 1983, Rachel was a 14-year-old schoolgirl preparing to start high school. She was described as gentle, thoughtful, soft-spoken, with a love for animals and for helping others. Often, she spent her free time visiting nursing homes, chatting with residents and playing games with them. Volunteering gave her a sense of purpose, and she dreamed of making the world a little better through small acts of kindness. But fate had other plans. March 3, 1983. I began like any other school day. Andrea had already married and moved to Reno, so Rachel lived at home with her mother. That morning, she woke up, I got ready for school, and spoke briefly with her sister on the phone before heading out. A light rain was falling, so she grabbed her umbrella and began walking toward the Seventh-day Adventist school just a few blocks away. Usually, Rachel walked with her classmate and close friend, Becky Turner. That morning, as she passed Becky's house, Rachel waited for a moment but noticed the family car was gone. Knowing that Becky's mother, a teacher at the school, often drove her children when the weather was bad, Rachel assumed Becky had already left and decided to continue walking to school alone around 8 o'clock a.m. At about 9 o'clock a.m., roughly 10 kilometers outside Red Bluff, a local farmer heard what he thought was a single gunshot. Concerned, he looked outside but saw his livestock unharmed. He also noticed a brown car driving slowly past his property, the driver seeming calm and unfamiliar. Believing it to be nothing serious, he returned to his chores. 2 hours later, Around 11:30 a.m., the farmer left his house to run errands. As he walked along the dirt road, he spotted something unusual by the fence line. Moving closer, he froze in horror. The body of a young girl lay on the ground, her hands bound, a gunshot wound visible on her head. Calling out brought no response. Realizing she was dead, and recalling the gunshot he had heard earlier, the farmer ran back to his house and phoned the sheriff's office. By midday, deputies had arrived on the scene. Beginning what would become one of Red Bluff's most haunting investigations, around 3:00 p.m., Sandy, Rachel's mother, got home from her afternoon shift at the California Highway Patrol Station. She immediately realized Rochelle wasn't there. Sandy called her older daughter, Andrea, who said she'd spoken to Rachel that morning and everything seemed normal. After that, Rachel went to school. It was strange because Rachel usually returned home around this time. Sandy grew concerned. Because mobile phones weren't common yet, Sandy couldn't contact Rachel directly. She decided to wait, hoping Rachel was just talking with a friend and had lost track of time. Turning on the television, Sandy immediately heard the news that the body of a teenage girl with a gunshot wound to the head had been found that morning. The victim had not yet been identified at the time of the report. This news only alarmed Sandy and Andrea even more. Sandy tried to call all of her daughter's friends, but only managed to reach a few. She got into her car and headed to Becky Turner's house. There, she found her daughter's best friend at home, and Becky confirmed Sandy's worst fears, saying that Rachel had not been to class that day. Horrified, Sandy immediately turned pale and went home. Now, she wanted to contact the sheriff's office to report her youngest daughter missing. At that time, law enforcement agencies were in the process of establishing the victim's identity. They immediately decided to check if the body found was Rachel. Sandy gave a detailed description of her daughter's clothes and appearance. A white blouse and blue jeans. This matched exactly the description of the victim of an unknown killer found outside the city earlier that day. Sandy was called in to identify the body. Based on her identification, the victim was confirmed to be 14-year-old Rachel Ward. The murder was a terrible blow to the family and alarmed the entire local community. The residents of Red Bluff were very scared, unsure of what to expect next. The uncertainty and increased media attention led to numerous rumors. Some were convinced that this was the work of a serial killer who would strike again if the police didn't catch him quickly. This hysteria, combined with the complex and often contradictory statements from witnesses, further worried local residents, especially school children, who feared they could be the maniac's main target. While the Ward family mourned their loss, detectives continued their investigation. Locals whispered about the motive behind Rachel's murder. Many believed she had been abused. However, at that time, it was still unknown whether Rachel had been abused or was simply the victim of random violence. Later, the sheriff held a press conference where he revealed some details of the investigation. It was confirmed that the girl had indeed been abused and then shot in the back of the head. However, they could not provide any specific information about the perpetrator. To calm the local community of parents and children, the police increased their presence in schools and patrolled the neighborhoods to make the city feel safer. Even with these measures, it took some children several years to fully recover from the trauma of this crime. Becky Turner was devastated by the death of her best friend. For several weeks, she couldn't sleep peacefully. She spoke several times with law enforcement officers who came to schools and taught children how to protect themselves and stay safe. After these instructions, students from local schools began to go to classes in groups. The girls were especially afraid of walking alone, and Becky experienced a paralyzing fear on the road she used to take to classes with Rachel, believing that Rachel had been kidnapped on that route. In April of that year, 11 students from the Seventh-day Adventist school gathered with the parents of Rachel in the school's backyard to plant tulips in memory of her. A memorial plaque with Rachel's name was also installed there. By this time, law enforcement officers had thoroughly checked the immediate surroundings of the murder site. Detectives failed to identify any potential suspects. Rachel didn't associate with dangerous people, nor did she have any behavioral problems or addictions. She seemed like a decent teenager with no problems with her parents or reasons to run away from home. She had no known enemies or admirers. A lot of evidence was collected from Rachel's body, and the crime scene But this did not lead detectives to the perpetrator. Despite a month of hard work, the investigation was at a dead end. The case took an unexpected turn in the 1990 seconds when Henry Lee Lucas, a notorious serial killer and prime suspect in countless other crimes, confessed to being involved in Rachel's murder. At the time, Lucas was already serving a life sentence for multiple murders and had a long, documented history of violence against women. After learning about Rachel's case, he claimed to have shot her. This wasn't unusual for Lucas. For years, he had made sweeping confessions, once boasting that he had spent 8 years traveling the highways of the United States and had killed more than 600 people. Detectives were skeptical. Lucas had a pattern of falsely claiming responsibility for high-profile crimes, seemingly in search of notoriety. In reality, he had been officially convicted of only 3 murders. His mother and 2 women. Investigators believe the vast majority of his other confessions were fabrications, with some of his supposed victims later proven to be entirely fictitious. Even so, his confession to Rachel's murder had to be taken seriously. Detectives pursued his statement and questioned him in detail. At the time of Rachel's murder, Lucas had reportedly been living near Sacramento, which, at least in theory, could have allowed him to travel to Red Bluff. However, during interrogation, he quickly revealed himself to be unreliable. He failed to recall the name of the city where the murder took place, claimed he had dumped the body somewhere near Sacramento, and gave numerous contradictory accounts. Over the course of a 3-hour interrogation, Lucas rambled, misidentified locations, and was unable to accurately describe the circumstances of the crime. This clearly shows that he lied again. Verifying Lucas's false confession consumed valuable time and resources. But in the end, investigators concluded that he had invented yet another story to feed his ego. He was eliminated as a suspect in Rachel's murder and never charged. Back in 1983, during the original investigation, law enforcement had collected DNA evidence from the crime scene, believed to belong to the killer. At the time, forensic technology was too primitive to make use of it. Years later, after Lucas's confession, detectives compared his DNA to the preserved evidence. The result was clear: there was no match. Lucas remained in prison until his death. Meanwhile, investigators continued to seek new leads. Detectives made repeated public appeals through the media, hoping to generate tips and attract potential witnesses. These efforts stirred significant attention in the local community. Several residents reported seeing a mysterious man driving a brown car in the area, someone unfamiliar in the otherwise quiet, rural farmland. Over the decades, as forensic science advanced, new suspects were considered and carefully investigated. One particularly valuable tip came from the owner of the ranch where Rachel's body had been found. He had contacted the police early on and provided a description of the driver of the brown car. Using his statement, investigators created a composite sketch. Unfortunately, the information was vague. No one had recorded the vehicle's license plate, and the driver's physical description was limited. Witnesses only recalled a stocky young man with long hair and a beard. From the evidence available, detectives were able to piece together only a rough sequence of events. After leaving her friend's house, Rachel walked a short distance toward the school. Along the road between her home and the school, she was approached by the man in the brown car. He allegedly threatened her with a gun and forced her inside. Neither the brown car nor its driver has ever been located. After the crime, investigators collected a substantial amount of physical evidence from the victim's body, including biological fluids and skin particles containing DNA. In 1983, however, DNA analysis was still in its infancy and provided no useful leads. Fortunately, the evidence was carefully documented, preserved, and stored in the police archives. Over the years, detectives pursued every possible angle, investigating men who resembled the composite sketch and scrutinizing suspicious vehicles, but no breakthrough was achieved. During this period, rumors began to circulate in Red Bluff. Some local residents noticed that the description of the mysterious brown car and its driver seemed to match Sheriff Ron Koenig, who was serving in office at the time. Whispers of suspicion spread, And despite Koenig's public proclamations of innocence, many townspeople believed he was being shielded because of his position in law enforcement. Although dozens of promising leads were investigated, no evidence ever linked him to the crime. Nonetheless, the suspicions persisted for years, casting doubt on his integrity and undermining his authority, so much so that some residents openly expressed hostility toward him. Although the investigation had reached a dead end, the case remained technically open into the 2010s. Throughout the 1992nd and early 21st century, new suspects emerged, each subjected to DNA testing. Retired detectives were replaced by fresh investigators who re-examined the evidence and re-interviewed witnesses. Despite these efforts, the results were always the same: no match. With the advent of advanced DNA techniques, the original materials were repeatedly retested, compared against state and national databases, yet none yielded a breakthrough. This stalemate lasted nearly 4 decades. But in 2022, 39 years after Rachelle's murder, the case finally entered a new phase. Law enforcement began exploring the cutting-edge technique of genetic genealogy, a method that identifies perpetrators by tracing their family trees through shared DNA. By then, millions of DNA samples had been voluntarily submitted to genealogical and law enforcement databases across the United States, creating an invaluable resource. Even if a suspect's DNA wasn't in the system, investigators could now locate relatives and build family connections to narrow down potential matches. While the process was often time-consuming, taking weeks or months, it had already revolutionized cold case investigations. With over 600 cases solved through genetic genealogy in 2023 alone, that same year, a dedicated team of detectives was assembled to re-examine unsolved crimes, and Rachelle's case was selected. In their review, they uncovered a key piece of overlooked evidence: a small tuft of hair recovered from the victim's body in 1983 that did not belong to her. Investigators believed it most likely came from her abuser and killer. Their plan was to extract DNA from the hair and use genealogical methods to trace the perpetrator's family tree. The Tehama County Sheriff's Office consulted with the FBI and the California Department of Justice, both of which had been involved in the original investigation. Together, they agreed to move forward with the new approach. The hair sample was sent to Astria Forensics, a laboratory specializing in degraded DNA recovery. Once a viable profile was developed, it was forwarded to the FBI for genealogical research. Unlike most cases, which often dragged on for months, progress came quickly. On September 7, 2023, detectives convened with Justice Department and FBI officials to review the findings. The genealogical analysis pointed toward a prime suspect, Johnny Coy, a former resident of Red Bluff. Coy's background immediately raised red flags. He had a long history of violent crimes against women, including one strikingly similar to the abduction, abuse, and murder of Rachelle. Despite this disturbing history, he had never been seriously considered a suspect in her case. Even well into his 80s, Coy remained known to police for petty crime, substance abuse, and violent outbursts. 6 years after Rachelle's death, in 1989, Coy stopped a car containing a woman and her 21-year-old daughter, who recognized him as a local resident. He forced them to drive to a deserted road, where he abused the daughter at gunpoint, stole their belongings and car, and abandoned them. The victims contacted law enforcement, and Coy was quickly apprehended while still armed and in possession of stolen items and illegal substances. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 life sentences. Detectives hoped to obtain a confession from Coy regarding Rachelle's murder. However, he had died in prison in June 2019, never facing justice for her death. Therefore, it became essential to prove his involvement by identifying his relatives and comparing their DNA to the evidence from the crime scene. Coy's family members were readily located in the area. After a detailed explanation, several agreed to voluntarily provide DNA samples, despite the potential for public scrutiny, with the promise of anonymity. While DNA matching in such cases is not always 100% conclusive, obtaining multiple samples significantly increased the accuracy of the analysis. Each DNA profile tested showed a significant match to the Johnny Coy family. Moreover, his appearance aligned with the witness's description of the perpetrator. Additionally, Johnny owned a brown car during those years. It remained unclear why checks in the registered databases had not yielded a match previously, especially considering Johnny was already incarcerated and his profile should have been in the database. The California Department of Justice even conducted an investigation into this discrepancy. The investigation revealed that Johnny's DNA sample was collected early in the development of DNA analysis techniques. Consequently, the combined DNA index system used by the FBI had outdated markers loaded in, markers which were only used for a limited time during the database's initial formation and were non-functional by 2020. Several decades had passed since the murder. Now, there was no doubt about Johnny Coy's involvement in the murder of Rachel. Johnny's profile, long uploaded to the database, was recompared with the markers collected from the strand of hair, and a thorough analysis confirmed a match. On October 3, 2023, the investigation of the case was completed. According to official commentary, had Johnny been alive when the DNA tests were conducted, the evidence would have been sufficient to charge him with Johnny's abuse and murder and secure a conviction at trial. Even with the best lawyers, his chances of avoiding punishment would have been minimal. The successful resolution of the Rachel Ward murder case, despite the passage of time, had a significant impact on everyone affected by Johnny Coy's actions. First, all suspicion against Sheriff Ron Koenig was eliminated, bringing relief to his family. Although he had passed away from natural causes in 2009, his name was finally cleared of any suspicion. Secondly, Rachel's loved ones were also relieved to finally know who was responsible for their daughter's murder. However, despite this discovery, Rachel's family is still not satisfied, as they want the killer to stand trial and receive the punishment he deserves. Furthermore, they would never learn all the details of what happened, details that Johnny took with him to the grave. The case was closed. Andrea, Rachel's older sister, spoke to journalists, expressing her sorrow and recounting her close relationship with Rachel. At the time of the murder, Andrea was pregnant, although she was not yet aware of it. Rachel had always been deeply interested in this topic. Her sister constantly asked her if she was pregnant. Rachel wanted her sister to have a baby so badly. Andrea was deeply saddened that Rachel did not live to see the birth of her niece, whom she named in honor of her deceased sister. Rachel was the kindest and brightest person in the world to Andrea. Now, Andrea said she felt mixed emotions. On one hand, after 40 long years, she finally knew who was guilty of her sister's murder. On the other hand, she wished she could personally confront the criminal and tell him about the suffering he inflicted on everyone who loved and was close to his victim. The detectives focused on more routine aspects of the investigation. Specifically, they were investigating whether Johnny Coy committed other violent crimes during the 6 years between Rachel's murder and the kidnapping of the woman and her daughter. While he could have committed several crimes during that time, only forensic evidence can confirm this, and no new evidence or DNA matches have been found yet. For years, she believed in second chances. She believed that kindness could change people, that patience could soften anger, that love, when given honestly, could heal even the deepest wounds. But in the early hours of April 5th, 2025, those beliefs were shattered forever. 27-year-old Victoria Tonenchuk, a daughter, a creator, a young woman who had rebuilt her life from grief, was found lying in the dark, her body broken, hair face bloodied, her breath fading. Beside her stood the person she once trusted, the man who insisted he cared. Minutes turned into hours. Help never came, and Victoria slipped into a coma, while the truth of that night twisted into something far more sinister. What unfolded on that lonely road outside Hleboka would ignite a storm across Ukraine, a question tearing through communities, families, and courtrooms alike. When love turns into control, how does it end? When Victoria Tonenchuk was born in 1998, it was truly a miracle that her parents had been waiting for many years. From a young age, she grew up surrounded by warmth and care. Her father worked hard to provide for the family, while her mother dedicated herself to raising the children. Victoria was diligent, kind, and excelled at school, especially in languages and the humanities. After graduating from high school, she enrolled in the Faculty of International Relations. She quickly earned a reputation as a responsible and motivated student, making her parents proud and confident in her promising future. But in 2020, tragedy struck. Her mother suddenly died from a blood clot on the way to the clinic. It was the hardest loss Victoria had ever faced. Left alone with her father, Victoria took on the household responsibilities and promised herself to make him proud. Around this same time, in the same region, lived Yuri Yurkovich. He grew up in an ordinary family. His father often worked abroad, and his mother had a job at a currency exchange office. Yuri tended to withdraw from others, reacted strongly to criticism, and remained dependent on his parents' approval. After finishing school, he entered university without a clear sense of purpose. After her mother's funeral, Victoria decided to be independent and build her own future. Staying in the small town, where painful memories always surrounded her, and the unstable job left her mentally exhausted. In the spring of 2021, she signed up for a work program and moved to Israel, hoping to start over. There, she worked as a preschool teacher, a job that was demanding both physically and emotionally, but it allowed her to support herself and send money home to her father. Life in a foreign land taught her independence. She quickly adapted, expanded her relationships, and spent her free time learning English and improving her knowledge. Not long after, feeling the need for a change, Victoria moved to Poland. Here, she found a job with a better income and stable working hours. She spent nearly 2 years there, saving money and shaping long-term plans. Still, her goal was never to live abroad permanently. She always dreamed of returning home and building a life in Ukraine. In late 2023, Victoria returned to the Chernivtsi region. Her father welcomed her back proudly, recognizing how much she had matured and achieved. Once home, Victoria focused on developing her personal blog. At first, she posted casual daily updates and thoughts. Gradually, she improved her content, began hosting live streams, and grew a loyal following. The blog soon provided stable income and turned into her main source of work. She started planning to expand her project, exploring collaborations and charity opportunities. Her structured daily routine helped her balance work, health, and personal life. Financial independence gave her confidence, and her days were now filled with stability, friendships, and clear goals. After years of rebuilding her life, Victoria had finally achieved balance. But just as she began planning her future, someone appeared who would change everything. In the summer of 2024, Victoria received a message from a young man she didn't know, Yuri Yurkovich, from her hometown of Hliboka. Their paths had never crossed before. Yuri was 18, a recent high school graduate about to start university, while Victoria was 27. Their first conversation was casual. Yuri told her he followed her blog, asked questions, and shared his own experiences. What started as a brief exchange soon became daily communication. Victoria didn't take it seriously. To her, it was a friendly and harmless chat. But Yuri kept writing, asking about her life, and urging her to meet. A few weeks later, they met in person for the first time. People close to Victoria said she came back from that first meeting in a good mood, describing Yuri as polite and considerate. Over time, their messaging grew more personal. Soon, Yuri started appearing in her photos, and the two were seen together in public. At first, no one expressed concern. Some friends mentioned the age difference, but Victoria brushed it off, saying it didn't matter. Initially, she believed Yuri's honesty made up for his youth. But before long, her friends and family began noticing troubling behavior. Yuri started calling constantly, always wanting to know where she was and who she was with. Victoria first saw this as caring attention. Then came the late-night calls. If she didn't reply right away, Yuri would flood her phone with messages, demanding to know why she hadn't answered. His behavior grew increasingly controlling. He insisted she tell him every detail of her day, where she was going, who she would meet, and even send photos to prove it. What worried her relatives most was Yuri's jealousy on social media. A simple comment or like on her social media posts could trigger suspicion or anger. Victoria tried to avoid conflict, excusing his behavior as immaturity and telling friends he would grow out of it. Even her father noticed the obvious change. Victoria became anxious and withdrawn, but kept saying that everything was fine. She didn't see Yuri's jealousy as dangerous, believing he just needed time to mature. What she didn't understand was that his concern was turning into full-blown control that would soon take a darker turn. By fall 2024, Yuri's behavior had become openly aggressive. Little things like Victoria going out with friends or posting on her blog would set him off. If Victoria did something without telling him, he started arguments that quickly escalated. He demanded photographic proof of wherever she went, insisting she show that no other men were present. He became increasingly irritable and controlling. Victoria's online work also became a source of controversy. Yuri said her public visibility embarrassed him and made their relationship too exposed. Complaints turned into commands. He forbade her from continuing her blog, even though it was her only income. While unemployed himself, he still demanded she follow his rules. Victoria's friends noticed a dramatic change. She became quiet and withdrawn, stopped sharing details about her life, and avoided social events. By late October, they noticed bruises on her arms. When they asked, she admitted they came from a fight with Yuri. He had hit her. Victoria insisted it was a one-time incident, that he was sorry and it wouldn't happen again. She refused to report him, saying she didn't want to destroy a young man's life. She believed he just couldn't manage his emotions. Her friends warned her that violence rarely stops, but she wouldn't listen. As time passed, Victoria began to justify Yuri's actions, blaming stress, jealousy, and immaturity. To her friends, it was clear she was caught in a dangerous cycle she couldn't recognize. Then, tragedy struck in early 2025. On January 4th, another argument erupted, once again driven by Yuri's jealousy. That evening, Yuri went to Victoria's home. The confrontation escalated quickly. Investigators later reported that Yuri struck her between 10 and 15 times on the head and body. Victoria was hospitalized with multiple injuries, hematomas, internal bleeding, and heavy bruising. Despite the extent of the harm, official reports classified the wounds as minor physical injury, a categorization that later raised serious questions. The injuries clearly showed signs of a severe assault. Victoria received medical treatment, and the case materials were sent to the police. She filed a formal statement describing what happened and identified Yuri as the person responsible. For her family and close friends, Victoria's report marked a major turning point, a sign she might finally be ending things with Yuri. Everyone thought Victoria had truly broken up with Yuri. But just a few weeks later, she suddenly withdrew her report and asked for the case to be closed. She said she didn't want to ruin a young man's life and believed Yuri understood how serious his actions were. Even her closest friends were shocked. Her father tried to dissuade her, urging her not to give up her legal rights, but she did not change her mind. Later, her friends noticed photos of flower bouquets on her social media. They suspected they were from Yuri. It appeared Victoria was convincing herself that things might improve. Despite everything, she never completely cut ties with him. She said she wanted to avoid drama and keep the peace. But Yuri was unrepentant, acting as if nothing serious had happened. Although the case was officially closed after Victoria withdrew her complaint, the tension lingered. On the surface, it seemed resolved, but in reality, Yuri had simply avoided accountability. Victoria tried to move on with her life. She resumed blogging and limited her contact with him. Her family hoped it was finally over. Victoria rarely mentioned Yuri and avoided questions about him. Yet it kept reappearing in her life. And while she seemed calm, that her inner circle noticed it was just a facade. She became more withdrawn. But the stress persisted. By early spring, Victoria seemed steadier. She focused on her future, stayed busy, and avoided revisiting the past. But for Yuri, their separation didn't mean the relationship was over. He saw it as just another chapter. On April 5, 2025, Victoria planned a normal day. That morning, she went to Chernivtsi for a skincare appointment. The procedure went well and lasted a few hours. Afterwards, she texted her friend Yalveda to say she needed to postpone their evening plans so her skin could recover. Yalveda didn't think much of it. She didn't know it would be the last message she ever received from Victoria. Later that evening, Victoria left Chernivtsi. A local taxi driver later confirmed he had taken a man and a woman to Hoboka. They sat together in the back seat, appeared calm, and didn't argue. He dropped them off near a gas station about 10 minutes from Yuri's house, then drove away. The two walked along a secluded road that cut through open fields and past abandoned buildings. The area was poorly lit and rarely used at that hour. About an hour after they were dropped off, a local resident heard a woman screaming. This person ran out to see and saw a woman lying motionless and a young man standing next to her, his clothes and hands covered in blood. When he asked what had happened, the young man said she had fallen because she was drunk and did not need emergency help. The witness offered to call for help, but the young man refused, claiming her parents were already coming to pick her up. Shortly after, a man and woman arrived, later identified as Yuri's parents. They lifted the barely conscious Victoria into their car and took her to a local hospital. During the trip, no one called emergency services, a detail that would later become a major point of concern in the investigation. At the same time, Victoria's father kept trying to reach her by phone. She didn't answer, which was unlike her. Hours later, he finally got a call from Yuri's mother, who told him that Victoria was in the hospital but reassured him it wasn't serious. When he arrived, however, doctors told him the truth. Victoria was in critical condition and already unconscious. Her injuries, as documented by medical staff, showed clear signs of a violent beating. The identity of her attacker had not yet been made public. That night, events unfolded too quickly for witnesses to fully understand what had happened. The start of a crime that would soon change the course of the entire investigation. When Victoria was admitted to the hospital in Hoboka, her condition was described as extremely serious. She was unconscious, struggling to breathe, and showing evidence of internal bleeding. Emergency doctors quickly determined she needed to be transferred to a regional trauma center. Tests showed severe head trauma, multiple fractures to her ribs and collarbones, and internal injuries to her liver and spleen. The medical team performed resuscitation procedures before placing her on a ventilator. Her condition was listed as coma. Doctors warned that her chances of survival were slim. By the time her father arrived, he was desperate for information, but the staff could tell him very little. All their efforts were focused on keeping her alive. The following days became a constant struggle for Victoria's survival. On April 6 and 7, her condition improved at times, but then quickly worsened. A medical commission later confirmed the diagnosis: severe closed head trauma, brain contusion, subdural hematoma, multiple fractures, and internal organ damage. Her father barely left the hospital, holding out hope. Victoria's friends and fans followed every piece of information shared on social media. While rumors spread quickly throughout the town, the authorities did not comment, and the police only collected preliminary information. By the fourth day, Victoria's condition had worsened. Her body stopped responding to treatment, and irreversible damage began. On April 10, 2025, Victoria was pronounced dead in her hospital room. She never regained consciousness and never had the chance to explain what had happened to her. Her death devastated her loved ones. Her father demanded answers: why no one had been arrested, and why investigators were still considering it might have been an accident. Doctors confirmed what her injuries already indicated: they were not consistent with a fall. Even so, no official charges were filed. When Victoria died, the case remained a preliminary investigation. Yuri Yurkovich's name appeared only as a witness. Her family and friends feared that the delays in the investigation would cause crucial evidence to be lost. For them, her death was not only a heartbreaking tragedy, but the beginning of a fight for justice In the following weeks, the investigation made little progress. Police interviewed a few witnesses, submitted some routine paperwork, and then stopped. Yuri Yurkovich, still listed only as a witness, remained free. Law enforcement's lack of action left Victoria's family shocked and furious. Her father repeatedly demanded answers, but investigators delayed forensic tests and refused to clarify what had happened. One issue troubled him most: the unexplained gap between the attack and Victoria's arrival at the hospital. A witness said that after the incident, Yuri spent a long time on the phone before his parents arrived. This delay raised concerns that key evidence might have been destroyed. When Victoria's father finally accessed her phone, he discovered that all her messages and contacts with Yuri had been deleted. Witnesses also claimed Yuri had 2 phones that night and might have wiped data before calling for help. Despite these suspicious details, no charges were initially filed against Yuri. Soon, rumors spread through the small town of Hlaboka. People whispered about Yuri's family connections and speculated that a relative in a powerful position could be influencing the investigation. There was no official confirmation, but one thing stood out. Authorities kept postponing Yuri's arrest without explanation. As the police stayed silent, Victoria's friends began to speak publicly. They posted evidence, screenshots, and photos online, and the story quickly spread. Local media picked it up, and journalists traveled to Hlaboka to interview witnesses and doctors, uncovering more inconsistencies in the investigation. The case soon became a national issue. Online discussions focused on contradictory reports, questionable forensic results, and the authorities' apparent inaction. Public outrage grew by the day. For Victoria's family, going public was their only way to pressure the system into responding. Only when the case attracted widespread attention did the police begin to make concrete progress, but valuable time had already been lost. Following the widespread media coverage, Hlaboka residents took to the streets demanding justice, Yuri's arrest, and accountability from local officials. Protesters gathered outside Yuri's home calling for consequences. Under mounting public pressure, on April 11, 2025, Yuri was finally arrested. A court hearing soon followed, where the judge ordered him to remain in custody without bail. The defense's request for house arrest was denied. In court, Yuri denied the accusations, claiming Victoria fell accidentally and that he didn't remember what happened. His remarks deeply angered her family, and the public sime. Prosecutors charged Yuri with causing severe bodily harm resulting in death. But Victoria's relatives insist the charge should be elevated to intentional murder, arguing that the attack was deliberate. For now, Yuri Yurkovich remains behind bars as the investigation continues. The trial is still ahead, and the country waits, hoping that this time, justice will finally prevail. Emma Youngestich, Torgny Hellberg, and their 2 children lived a peaceful life in their small house in Arboga. But that night, everything turned tragic in a way no one could have imagined. Emma's conversation with her sister suddenly ended, and just 13 minutes later, Torgny returned home to a horrifying scene: broken furniture, blood smeared across the walls, and 3 bodies lying motionless on the cold floor. Their faces so brutally disfigured they were barely recognizable. No signs of forced entry, not a single scream for help. Only the dark shadow of someone once known turned love into hatred, and hatred into death. So who is the killer? Why did he want to destroy an innocent family? Watch until the end of the video, because the truth behind this massacre will send shivers down your spine. Emma Youngestich was born in Stockholm on February 16, 1985, and spent nearly all her childhood and adolescence there. She grew up in a modest family, together with her older sister, Katarina. At 19, Emma married Nicholas, her high school sweetheart. He was only slightly older than her, and at the time of their wedding, she was already pregnant. At 20, Emma gave birth to their son, Max, About a year and a half later, their daughter, Saga, was born. Despite having 2 children, they still struggled with the realities of family life. They argued frequently and couldn't find common ground. And shortly after Saga's birth, they decided to separate. The breakup led to a painful custody battle. Nicholas wanted not only to provide financial support, but also to be actively involved in raising the children. Emma did not object to his involvement, but soon she began a new relationship. She moved with the children to Arboga, a small town about 150 kilometers from Stockholm, to live with her new partner. Nicholas opposed the move, wanting daily access to his children. They went to court several times to resolve the issue, and Nicholas even threatened Emma, something she immediately reported to the police. Unable to reach an amicable agreement, they sought sole custody of the child. At that time, Emma met her new partner Torgny Hellberg online. They connected quickly and began dating. Torgny wasn't deterred by the fact that 23-year-old Emma already had 2 children. He had long wanted a family and was ready to accept them as his own. At first, they lived in a small house Torgny had inherited. When they decided to marry, they moved to a larger home where the children could each have their own room. At the time, Torgny had a good job with a solid income. Emma stayed home to care for Max and Saga and manage the household. Trained as a designer, she planned to work in her field later. They intended to marry in the summer of 2008, but those plans would never come to pass. On Monday, March 17, 2008, it began like any other day. Torgny left early for work, and Emma stayed home with 3-year-old Max and 1.5-year-old Saga. That evening, while preparing dinner and waiting for Torgny to return, Emma was chatting online with her sister, Katarina, about a gift for their parents' upcoming wedding anniversary. Around 6:30 p.m., Torgny called to say he was delayed at work and that they could start dinner without him. After the call, Emma continued her chores, fed the children, and resumed her online conversation with Katarina. At 7:07 p.m., their chat suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Katarina found it strange. She could see Emma was typing, but no message was sent. 5 minutes later, concerned, Katarina called Emma, but there was no answer. She then called Torgny, who was driving home and nearing the house. He reassured Katarina that everything was probably fine. Emma was probably busy with the kids, and said she would call back soon. When Torgny reached the house, he noticed the front door was unlocked. Inside, he saw a mess he first assumed the children had made while playing. Then he spotted brown stains and smears on the floor and realized, with horror, that it was blood. He called out for Emma, Max, and Saga, but no one responded. In the hallway, Torgny saw something on the floor. At first, he thought it was a doll because the body lay in an unnatural position. As he approached, he realized it was Saga, lying in a pool of blood. Her head and face were so badly mutilated that she was unrecognizable. A little farther away lay Max, also brutally injured, with a fractured skull. Emma was on the floor too, covered in blood and twisted into an unnatural pose. Her face was shattered and disfigured. None of them seemed to be alive. Shocked and trembling, Torgny called the emergency number. As he spoke, Emma suddenly shuddered and let out a long, loud groan. Police and paramedics arrived quickly. I found weak pulses in all 3 and began resuscitation. The scene was horrific. No one could imagine what kind of monster would do this to a young woman and her children. But the top priority was saving lives. So Emma, Max and Saga were taken to the nearest hospital. At the hospital, the fight for survival began as the investigation started. From the start, the medical staff expressed doubts about whether Emma and her 2 children would make it to the hospital alive. However, all 3 were still alive when they arrived. Each had open head wounds, severe brain damage, and massive blood loss. The doctors offered no prognosis, only their best efforts. Max and Saga were in critical condition. Even if they survived, they were unlikely to breathe on their own again. Emma's condition was described as very serious but stable. She was placed in a medically induced coma and put on life support in the hope her body could recover. Meanwhile, forensic teams examined the scene, piecing together what happened. The house was in chaos, belongings scattered, blood on floors and walls. The medics, in their rush to save lives, had moved items and left footprints, complicating the evidence. Investigators now had to determine which prints belonged to responders and whether any belonged to the attacker. The timeline was chilling. The assault had to have occurred within a 13-minute window. Emma's last message to Katerina was sent at 7:07 p.m., and Torgny's call to the police came at 7:20 p.m. The brutality suggested a personal motive and deep hatred. The weapon appeared to be a heavy blunt object, likely a hammer. Used with extreme force, no such object was found, indicating the attacker took it. From the start, Torgny was the prime suspect. He was not the father of Max and Saga, so investigators believe a family dispute led to the deaths. He was questioned immediately, but his alibi was solid. He had been working late, as confirmed by his boss and colleagues, and at the likely time of the attack he was walking outside, captured by multiple CCTV cameras. Even so, Torgny was asked for a detailed statement. He remembered nothing unusual before discovering the scene, except that the front door was unlocked, suggesting Emma may have let the attacker in. After questioning, he was released. He had already informed Emma's family, and her parents rushed from Stockholm to Arboga. They drove straight to the hospital, but on the way they heard devastating news on the radio. Max and Saga had died of their injuries without regaining consciousness. The new suspect is Nicholas, Emma's ex-husband and Max and Saga's father. Although they had been divorced for over a year, their separation was far from peaceful. They constantly argued, fought over custody, and Nicholas even threatened Emma, something she reported to the police. The motive seemed to fit. After the breakup, Emma took the children, moved to another city to live with Torgny, and, unable to win custody, Nicholas might have lashed out in rage and murdered the children. Nicholas was quickly located and taken into custody. He appeared devastated by the news of Max and Saga's deaths, sobbing and repeatedly asking if there had been a mistake. When charged, he was first stunned, then insisted he would never harm the children he adored. When asked about his whereabouts during the time of the incident, he said he was in another city on a one-day business trip. It initially sounded suspicious, but his alibi was soon confirmed. He was 120 miles away from Emma and her children. Max and Saga, when the attack occurred, fearing for Emma's life and searching for clues. Forensic investigators continued to work the scene. The attacker had clearly worn gloves. No fingerprints were found. Shoe prints were harder to analyze because numerous medical personnel had entered the house to assist and remove the victims. Investigators now had to catalog all the footprints and eliminate those belonging to medics. Torgny, or the family. Police fear the perpetrator, after learning that Emma survived, may try to enter the hospital to commit murder. As a key witness, she could identify the attacker once conscious. Therefore, a 24-hour guard was posted outside her room. Meanwhile, officers canvassed the neighborhood. One woman reported seeing, around 5:00 p.m., a person dressed in black walking near Emma and Torgny's house. She couldn't see the face because of a hood, but thought the figure looked short and slight, possibly a woman. A similar hooded figure was captured by a street surveillance camera near a store a few minutes from the crime scene. Investigators also thought the person appeared to be a small, frail woman. But who is she? And why is she targeting Emma, Max, and Saga? The footage was shown to Torgny for his opinion. From the first frames, he turned pale and said it might be his ex-girlfriend, 31 years old, Christine Schurer, though he couldn't be certain. Christine Schurer was born in Hanover, Germany, in 1977. Her father left when she was a child and largely cut off contact, which negatively affected her mental state and behavior. She grew up strong-willed and driven, but difficult. As a teenager, she went to the United States on an exchange program and lived in New York for several years. She received a solid education in history and archaeology and traveled extensively across Europe, participating in excavations and expeditions. In the summer of 2006, she went to Crete, Greece, where she worked as a tour guide at a popular hotel. In July, 26 years old, Torgny arrived there on vacation and immediately attracted Christine. He, in turn, was drawn to her intelligence and charm, and they began an affair almost immediately. Christine was 29 at the time, but the small age difference didn't bother them. Their relationship lasted a week while he stayed at the hotel, and after he left, they continued to talk by phone and correspond online. A few months later, Christine showed up in Sweden and directly asked to stay at Torgny's house. Even then, her behavior seemed intrusive and tactless to him. When she invited him on a weekend trip to the mountains, he refused and hoped it would be the last time they met. But she kept calling, writing, and pushing for another meeting. In January 2007, during a phone call, Torgny told her clearly that their relationship was over and they should not meet again. Christine ignored this. She continued to call, asking to visit him and inviting him to go on vacation with her. In spring 2007, Christine returned to Sweden and began to stalk Torgny. She tried to persuade him to renew their relationship, even though he honestly told her he was already seeing someone else. She then claimed she had left some belongings at his house on a previous visit and needed to retrieve them. Torgny agreed, but once inside, she tried to seduce him. When he firmly refused, she warned he would regret it. 3 months later, Christine returned, apologized for her behavior, and continued to beg Torgny to come back to her. He rejected her. That evening, she called to say she had taken pills because she didn't want to live without him. Torgny immediately called an ambulance and contacted her family, recounting the incident and advising them to take her to see a psychiatrist. After receiving emergency care, Christine's mother placed her in a psychiatric hospital, where she stayed for over a month. The treatment had little effect. Christine remained fixated on Torgny, constantly plotting ways to see him and win him back. In October 2007, Christine decided to move to Sweden and settled in a Stockholm suburb, sharing an apartment with another woman. She resumed pursuing Torgny. When she finally met him, she claimed she had given birth to his son and had placed the child with a foster family. Torgny was shocked, but primarily wanted to know when this had happened. Their last intimacy had been more than a year earlier, and they had met several times since without Christine showing any signs of pregnancy. She avoided direct answers and kept changing the details. In January 2008, after many failed attempts to meet, Christine messaged Torgny saying their son had been diagnosed with a hereditary disease and that they needed to travel to Germany together to see him. She added that the boy's adoptive father would call with details. At the time, Torgny and his partner, Emma, were moving to a new home. Emma knew the entire situation and believed Christine was trying to lure him to Germany, insisting there was no child. When a man called claiming to be the adoptive father, Torgny, following Emma's advice, asked specific questions: the child's birth date, the hospital, and other details. The caller grew irritated, dodged the questions, and then hung up. Torgny concluded there was no child and that Christine had invented the story, enlisting someone to play along. After learning of this, detectives quickly found Christine's address and went there. Her roommate said she had hurriedly packed her things the day before and said she was going back to Germany. Records confirmed she had left the country, so Swedish police requested assistance from their German counterparts to arrest her. On March 20, a warrant for her arrest was issued. When Christine was arrested, she insisted there had been a mistake and denied any involvement in the massacre. After being extradited to Sweden on March 29, she immediately asked to meet with Torgny, but the request was denied. She remained calm. Though she repeatedly asked to see or call him, police thoroughly searched Christine's rented apartment and seized her phone and laptop. They examined all her clothing and found no traces of blood. By that time, the investigators had determined which blood-soaked footprints at the scene did not belong to the medical personnel, Emma, or her children. The prints were athletic shoes. From the tread pattern, they determined the brand and style. The size matched Christine's. She claimed she had never owned that model, but her roommate identified the shoes as hers, contradicting her statement. Christine's laptop yielded even more troubling evidence. It contained numerous photos of Torgny, and both of them together and of him alone or with Emma. In a separate folder with a disturbing title were photos of Emma, Max, and Saga that Christine had copied from Emma's social media. Christine had added captions to these images that were insulting, threatening, and frightening. The recovered search history included queries about committing murder without leaving evidence, hiding traces of a crime, and diverting suspicion. Investigators also found notes, a plan of Emma and Torgny's new home, Torgny's work scheduler, and details of the family's daily routine. At this point, Emma's condition was stable, and her vital signs had improved. Toward the end of March, doctors began bringing her out of a medically induced coma. At first, she could not speak due to the breathing tube, but her gaze was responsive. She recognized the relatives present. However, she did not understand what had happened or why she was in the hospital. As soon as she could speak clearly, police arranged to interview her, but chose not to tell her what had happened to Max and Saga. Emma had no memory of the day of the attack and assumed she had been in a car accident. She repeatedly asked about Max and Saga and whether they were safe. Initially, her family and medical team gave evasive answers, but eventually they decided not to withhold the truth. When Emma was told that her children had died, she became hysterical. Doctors had to sedate her. Upon waking, she did not remember the conversation and asked about the children again. This cycle continued for several weeks. Each time she was told of their deaths, her mind seemed to refuse the information, erasing it anew. About a month later, Emma, accompanied by medical staff, returned to the house. Once inside, her memory suddenly returned. She recalled texting with Katerina while setting the table as the children played nearby. There was a knock at the door. She opened it to see a short, dark-clothed woman on the threshold. When Emma asked what she wanted, she felt a sharp pain and everything went black. The figure slipped into the house. Desperate, Emma tried to follow to protect her children, but collapsed in the hallway, where the attacker tried to finish her off. Christine continued to deny involvement. The murder weapon was never found, and most of the evidence was circumstantial, which gave her a chance of avoiding conviction. However, her roommate told investigators that a hammer had gone missing from her toolkit in March. She provided the toolkit, and investigators determined that a tool of that brand, size, and configuration matched the likely murder weapon, though this, too, was circumstantial. Detectives also obtained surveillance footage from a suburban bus station showing Christine traveling to Arboga 3 times in the week before the crime. She could not explain these trips, though it appeared she was surveilling Emma, nor could she explain her internet searches on covering up a crime or her collection of photos of Emma, Max, and Saga. On July 29, 2008, Christine's trial began. She was charged with 2 counts of murder with particular cruelty and 1 count of attempted murder. Her behavior in court was unsettling. She entered smiling and waving, and when questioned about the massacre, while being shown graphic footage of the mutilated victims, she suddenly laughed. Although this behavior suggested possible insanity, a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation concluded she was fully sane and aware of her actions. She appeared to take pleasure in what she had done and made no effort to conceal it. When Emma saw Christine in the courtroom, she fainted. After regaining consciousness, she said she finally remembered everything and that Christine's face was the last thing she saw on the day of the crime. Despite the defense's efforts to establish Christine's innocence, the jury unanimously found her guilty on all charges. She received a life sentence without the possibility of release and was ordered to pay Emma 20,000 euros in compensation. Investigators also found no evidence that Christine had ever been pregnant or had a child with Torgny. As for Emma, her recovery was long and difficult, but she remained by Torgny's side. They married in the summer of 2010. They are currently raising 2 children,